Hello friends. Did you know nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy these stories, please hit that subscribe button and leave a like. It really helps. Thank you for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. My name is Ethan Briggs. I've been a truck driver for 22 years and have worked around Colorado for the last 14. People ask me why I still do this job, why I don't look for something easier. My answer is always the same. You either know Colorado or you don't. If you know it, nowhere else will satisfy you. If you don't, you won't last long here. That night, Thursday, January 14th, I left Grand Junction at exactly 9:47 p.m. My load was gear parts to be delivered to a warehouse in Denver. Nothing special. It was a routine job I'd done hundreds of times before. Cole, the dispatcher I'd been working with for 6 years, had called me that afternoon and given me the job. "Ethan, I have a job for you in Denver. You need to be there by 6 a.m. tomorrow." "What's the pay?" "Standard, but I-70 is clear tonight. No closures, no delays. It should be smooth sailing." I'd checked the weather myself before leaving. Clear skies, temperatures hovering around 20 degrees. The mountain passes were open, recently plowed. It looked like one of those rare winter nights where everything just works in your favor. I should have known better. I'd been running I-70 through the Rockies since 2011, back when I first moved to Colorado from Nebraska. Those first few months taught me everything I needed to know about respect. Respect for the mountains, respect for the weather, respect for the road itself. I'd seen trucks jackknifed on Vail Pass, seen semis abandoned in snowdrifts on Loveland, seen accidents that closed the entire interstate for 12 hours. The mountains don't care how experienced you are or how good your equipment is. They'll humble you the moment you forget that. My rig that night was a 2019 Freightliner Cascadia, navy blue, with just under 340,000 miles on it. I'd been driving her for 3 years, knew every quirk and rattle. The engine had a slight tick when it was cold. The passenger mirror vibrated above 65, and the heater took exactly 4 minutes to start blowing warm air. She wasn't perfect, but she was mine, and I trusted her completely. I merged onto I-70 eastbound just before 10 o'clock. The highway was almost empty, just a few scattered cars and one other semi about 2 miles ahead of me. His taillights were the only company I had as I started the climb toward the mountains. The radio was playing some 80s rock station out of Grand Junction. Springsteen or maybe Mellencamp, I don't remember exactly. The first hour was exactly what I expected. The road rose steadily as I approached Glenwood Canyon, those massive walls of rock rising up on either side of the highway. Even at night, even when you can't see them clearly, you can feel their presence. The way your headlights don't quite reach as far, the way sounds echo differently. It's like driving through a cathedral made of stone. I passed through Glenwood Springs around 10:45. The lights of the town scattered along the Colorado River below the highway. A few restaurants were still open, their neon signs reflecting off the dark water. I thought about stopping for coffee but decided against it. I had a full thermos and Cole was right. The road was running clean. No reason to add extra time. The other semi I'd been following turned off at the Glenwood exit. I watched his taillights disappear down the ramp, and then I was alone. Completely alone. The highway stretched ahead of me, empty and dark, the white lines disappearing into the distance like a film reel running in reverse. That's when I noticed the first strange thing. It was small, barely worth mentioning, but it stuck in my mind. My odometer read 178,432 miles. I'd glanced at it when I left Grand Junction, 178,391. That meant I'd driven 41 miles, but according to my GPS, I'd only covered 38. 3 miles off. I figured it was nothing. GPS isn't perfect in the mountains, especially in the canyons where the signal bounces around. The odometer could be slightly off too, or maybe I'd misread it back in Grand Junction. I adjusted my grip on the wheel and kept driving. The highway continued to climb. I passed the exit for Carbondale, then Basalt. The temperature gauge on my dashboard showed 19 degrees outside. Cold, but nothing unusual for January in the high country. I could see my breath when I exhaled, little clouds of vapor that disappeared in the glow of the instrument panel. Around 11:20, I started the real ascent toward Vale Pass. This is where the highway gets serious, where it stops being just a road and becomes something else entirely. The grade steepens, the curves tighten, and you're suddenly very aware that you're driving a 40-ton vehicle up the side of a mountain at 11,000 feet. I downshifted, feeling the engine brake engage. The Cascadia handled it well, like she always did. I'd learned a long time ago that you don't fight the grade. You work with it, let the truck find its rhythm. Too many rookies try to power up these passes, and that's when things go wrong. Overheated brakes, burned-out engines, trucks rolling backward into guardrails. The rock walls on either side of the highway started to close in. This section of I-70, between Glenwood and Vale, is some of the most dramatic terrain you'll find on any interstate in America. Sheer cliffs dropping hundreds of feet, tunnels blasted through solid rock. The highway itself carved into the mountainside like a scar. During the day, it's beautiful. At night, it's something else entirely. I entered the first tunnel, the Hanging Lake Tunnel, I think, and the sound of my engine immediately changed, becoming louder and more hollow. The walls of the tunnel reflected my headlights back at me, creating strange shadows that seemed to move independently. I've driven through this tunnel hundreds of times, but it never stops feeling slightly claustrophobic, like the mountain is closing around you just for a moment before spitting you back out the other side. When I emerged, I checked my mirrors out of habit. Empty highway behind me, empty highway ahead. Nothing but darkness and the steady white lines of the road. That's when I saw the second strange thing. My fuel gauge showed 3/4 full. I'd filled up completely in Grand Junction before leaving, and the tank on the Cascadia holds about 150 gallons. At my current speed and grade, I should have been using maybe 6 or 7 gallons per hour. I'd only been driving for about 90 minutes. The gauge should have shown nearly full, maybe down to 7/8 at most. I tapped the gauge with my finger, wondering if it was sticking. The needle didn't move. 3/4. I tried to think of an explanation. Maybe the fuel station's pump had shut off early. Maybe I hadn't actually filled the tank completely. But I remembered watching the numbers tick by on the pump display. $387.42 for a full tank. I always filled it completely. Always had. I made a mental note to check the gauge again in another hour, and kept driving. The highway continued to climb, winding its way up through the darkness. I passed the exit for Eagle, barely visible in the night. Just a few scattered lights in the valley below. The clock on my dashboard read 11:58 p.m. Midnight came and went. I was approaching the summit of Vale Pass now, 10,600 feet above sea level. The air was thinner up here, and I could feel it in the way the engine worked slightly harder, the way my own breathing changed when I inhaled. Your body knows when it's this high up, even if your brain doesn't consciously register it. The pass itself was clear. The road crews had done their job well. No ice, no snow, just clean pavement disappearing into my headlights. I should have been grateful. Instead, I felt a growing unease I couldn't quite explain. Something felt off about the night, about the road, about the complete and total absence of any other vehicles. I'd driven I-70 at night plenty of times before. It was never exactly crowded, But there were always a few other trucks, always a few cars. People driving to Denver, people heading to the ski resorts, road crews working overnight, state patrol making their rounds. But tonight there was nothing. Just me and the road, and the darkness pressing in from all sides. I crested the summit and started the descent toward Vail. The highway widened here, the grade easing slightly. In the distance, I could see the lights of Vail Village, that expensive ski resort where people paid thousands of dollars to slide down mountains for fun. The lights looked warm and inviting, a small constellation of civilization in the vast darkness. But I wasn't stopping in Vail. My route took me straight through, down the pass, and on toward the Eisenhower Tunnel and eventually Denver. I watched the lights of Vail approach, then pass by on my right. The exit ramps came and went. I stayed on I-70, maintaining my speed, following the white lines that seemed to glow slightly in my headlights. That's when I noticed the third strange thing, and this one I couldn't explain away. My GPS showed that I was approaching the Eisenhower Tunnel, the long tunnel that cuts through the Continental Divide at 11,000 feet. According to the GPS, I was about 15 miles away, maybe 20 minutes at my current speed. But that was impossible. I'd just crested Vail Pass. The Eisenhower Tunnel was at least 40 miles from Vail, maybe more. I knew this route like I knew my own name. There was no way I could be that close to the tunnel already. I looked at the GPS again, thinking maybe I'd misread it. But no, the little blue dot showing my position was clearly approaching the tunnel icon on the map. The distance read 14.7 miles to Eisenhower Tunnel. I checked my odometer, 178,511 miles. That meant I'd driven 79 miles since leaving Grand Junction. But Grand Junction to the Eisenhower Tunnel was about 150 miles. I was nowhere near halfway there yet. Something was wrong with my instruments. That was the only explanation. The GPS was glitching, the odometer was running fast. Maybe there was some electrical problem affecting all the gauges at once. I'd heard of that happening in older trucks. Some kind of voltage issue that made all the displays go haywire. But the Cascadia was only 5 years old, and I'd never had any electrical problems before. Everything else seemed to be working fine. The lights, the radio, the heater. Just the navigation and distance measurements seemed off. I decided to rely on landmarks instead. I knew this road well enough that I didn't really need GPS anyway. I'd watch for the exit signs, the distinctive features of the highway. That would tell me where I actually was, regardless of what my instruments said. The highway continued its descent. I was in that stretch between Vail and Copper Mountain now, a section of road I'd driven countless times. The rock walls were a certain way here. The curves had a certain rhythm. I knew this section, except something was different. The curves weren't quite where I expected them to be. The tunnels seemed slightly longer than I remembered. The rock formations on the sides of the highway looked familiar, but somehow wrong, like seeing your own face in a distorted mirror. I gripped the wheel tighter, trying to shake off the growing sense of wrongness that was settling over me. I was just tired, I told myself. Tired and letting my imagination run away with me. Colorado roads at night could play tricks on your perception, especially when you were alone and there was nothing to focus on except the road itself. The clock showed 1:33 a.m. I'd been driving for about 3.5 hours. At my speed, I should have been somewhere around Silverthorne or Frisco, approaching the Eisenhower Tunnel for real. But when I looked at the GPS, it still showed me only about 12 miles from the tunnel. The distance had barely changed. I tried the radio, thinking maybe hearing another human voice would help ground me. I scanned through the stations, but all I got was static. That wasn't unusual in the mountains. The peaks blocked signals, created dead zones where nothing came through clearly. I left it on the static for a while, finding something almost comforting in the white noise. Then, cutting through the static, I heard a voice. Just for a moment, just a few words. Still climbing. And then it was gone, swallowed back into the hiss and crackle. I scanned back to that frequency, but there was nothing. Just static. I tried other stations, but they were all dead. I turned the radio off, and the silence in the cab felt even heavier than before. The highway continued. I recognized the exit for Copper Mountain, or at least I thought I did. The sign looked right, the ramp curved away to the right the way it should, but something about the spacing seemed off, like it had appeared slightly earlier than I expected, or slightly later. I couldn't tell which. I checked my fuel gauge again, half full. That was impossible. I'd only been driving for a few hours. Even climbing through the mountains, the Cascadia shouldn't be using fuel that fast. I was burning through my tank at double or triple the normal rate. Or maybe I wasn't. Maybe the gauge was just broken, showing me random numbers that had nothing to do with my actual fuel level. I thought about stopping, checking the tank manually with a dipstick. But where would I stop? The highway stretched on, empty and dark, with no rest areas in sight. I realized I hadn't seen a rest area since I'd left Grand Junction. There should have been at least 2 by now, maybe 3. Places where truckers pulled off to sleep, where families stopped to let their kids run around. But every exit I'd passed had been just that. An exit leading to some town or resort I couldn't see in the darkness. No rest areas, no truck stops, nothing. The clock showed 2:01 a.m. I'd been driving for about 4 hours, which meant I should be getting close to Denver, but my GPS, still glitching, still wrong, showed me only 8 miles from the Eisenhower Tunnel. The little blue dot had barely moved on the screen. I started to feel a tightness in my chest, a growing panic that I forced myself to breathe through. I was fine. The truck was fine. I was just experiencing some kind of instrument malfunction, that's all. I'd get through the Eisenhower Tunnel, and once I was on the other side, descending toward Denver, everything would make sense again. The highway rose again. I was climbing, shifting down, the engine brake engaging with its familiar growl. This must be the approach to the tunnel, I thought. The road climbed steeply just before the tunnel, winding its way up to 11,000 feet. I'd be there soon, except I'd been thinking that for the last hour. I'd been approaching the tunnel, getting close to the tunnel, almost at the tunnel, for what felt like forever. And yet it never appeared. Just more highway, more rock walls, more darkness pressing in from all sides. I checked my odometer. 178,724 miles. That meant I'd driven 233 miles since leaving Grand Junction. But I still hadn't reached the tunnel. That was impossible. Even if I'd somehow taken a wrong turn, even if I'd exited the highway without realizing it, there was no way I could have driven that far without passing through the tunnel or ending up somewhere else entirely. The fuel gauge showed a quarter tank. At this rate, I'd run out of fuel before I reached Denver. I'd run out of fuel before I reached anywhere. I'd just stop, here in the darkness, with the mountains rising around me and no one else on the road to help. I thought about turning around, just doing a U-turn on the highway and heading back the way I'd come. But something stopped me. The thought of turning around, of driving back through all that darkness I'd already passed, felt worse somehow than continuing forward. At least forward felt like progress, even if I had no idea where I was actually going. The clock showed 2:47 a.m. I'd been driving for 5 hours. 5 hours, and I still hadn't reached a tunnel that should have been 45 minutes from Vail. 5 hours, and my fuel was nearly gone. 5 hours, and I hadn't seen another vehicle, another person, another sign of human life except for the occasional exit ramp disappearing into darkness. That's when I saw the headlights behind me. Just a flash in my mirror, there and then gone. I stared at the mirror, watching, waiting for them to appear again. Nothing. Just darkness. But I'd seen them. I was sure I'd seen them. 2 headlights maybe half a mile back appearing around a curve and then vanishing. Another truck, a car, something else? I watched the mirror for the next 10 minutes, but the lights never reappeared. Whatever I'd seen was gone, or had never been there at all. A reflection, maybe, a trick of the light, my own headlights bouncing off a sign or a guardrail in just the right way to create the illusion of another vehicle. The highway continued to climb. I was still ascending, still working my way up some endless grade that seemed to have no summit. The engine temperature was fine, the oil pressure normal. Everything mechanical was working perfectly. It was only the measurements that were wrong. The odometer, the fuel gauge, the GPS, the clock that seemed to be moving too fast or too slow. I couldn't tell which. I tried my cell phone thinking maybe I could call someone. Cole, the dispatcher. Or just 911, tell them I was lost somehow, that something was wrong. But my phone showed no signal. Not one bar, not even that little searching indicator. Just nothing. As if the phone couldn't even detect that cell towers existed. The clock showed 3:15 a.m., then 3:16, then 3:17. I watched the numbers change, counting the seconds in my head, trying to determine if time was moving at the correct speed. 60 seconds between 3:16 and 3:17, 60 seconds between 3:17 and 3:18. Everything seemed normal, and yet nothing felt right. I saw a sign ahead, reflecting in my headlights. I slowed down slightly, trying to read it. Eisenhower Tunnel, 5 miles. Finally, 5 miles. 10 minutes, maybe 15, and I'd be through the tunnel, and this nightmare would be over. But 5 miles came and went. The tunnel never appeared. Just more highway, more rock walls, more endless darkness. I checked the GPS, 3.2 miles to Eisenhower Tunnel. I drove another 15 minutes. GPS, 2.8 miles to Eisenhower Tunnel. The distance was barely changing, or I was barely moving, or the tunnel itself was moving, staying always just out of reach, like the horizon line that recedes as you walk toward it. I thought about my wife Claire, asleep back home in our little house outside Grand Junction. She'd be angry that I hadn't called, but she'd be used to it too. I often lost signal in the mountains, often didn't check in until I reached Denver. She wouldn't start worrying until morning, until 6 a.m. came and went without me delivering the load. And Cole, the dispatcher. He'd try calling me around 6:30, wondering where I was. He'd call the warehouse in Denver, find out I hadn't shown up. He'd try my cell, get no answer. Eventually, he'd call the state patrol, report a missing truck. They'd start looking for me, checking the obvious places first. Rest areas, truck stops, accident scenes. But I wasn't at any of those places. I was here, wherever here was, driving endlessly toward a tunnel that never got closer, burning fuel that shouldn't be burning, racking up miles that didn't exist on any map. The clock showed 4:03 a.m. The sky should have been starting to lighten by now, that pre-dawn glow that comes before sunrise. But it was still completely dark as it had been at midnight. No hint of light on the horizon, no stars visible through the windshield. Just darkness and the white lines of the road. My fuel gauge showed empty. The low fuel warning light had been on for the last 20 minutes, but the engine kept running, the truck kept moving forward. I should have coasted to a stop already, should have been stranded on the side of the highway waiting for help that would never come. But I was still driving, still climbing, still chasing that tunnel that stayed forever out of reach. The engine coughed once, a slight stutter that I felt through the steering wheel. My hands tightened on the wheel, waiting for the power to die, for the Cascadia to finally run out of fuel and roll to a stop. But the cough passed, and the engine kept running, steady and strong despite what the fuel gauge was telling me. I'd been driving for what felt like 6 hours, maybe 7. The clock showed 4:41 a.m., which meant it had only been about 7 hours since I'd left Grand Junction. But it felt longer. Time had taken on a strange quality, stretching and compressing in ways I couldn't quite track. Minutes felt like hours, and then hours would pass in what seemed like moments. The highway had been climbing steadily for most of the night. At first, I thought I was approaching the Eisenhower Tunnel, but now I wasn't sure. The grade didn't feel right for that approach. It was too consistent, too unvarying. The real road climbed in stages, with plateaus and dips, sections where you'd get a brief respite before the next ascent. This was just one continuous climb, as if I was driving up the side of a mountain that had no peak. I'd stopped checking the GPS about an hour ago. The numbers had stopped making any sense. 1 minute it would show me 2 miles from the tunnel, the next it would show 5, then back to 3. The little blue dot would jump around the screen, sometimes showing me on I-70, sometimes showing me in the middle of nowhere, sometimes showing me in places that didn't exist. The odometer had stopped working entirely. It still showed 178,124 miles, the same number it had shown for the last 2 hours. Either it had frozen, or I'd stopped covering distance in any meaningful way. I couldn't decide which possibility was worse. Outside, the rock walls continued to rise on either side of the highway. In my headlights, I could see patterns in the stone, striations and folds, the layered history of the Earth's crust. During the day, geologists loved these road cuts, the way they revealed millions of years of geological history. At night, they looked like something else, like teeth, or scales, or the walls of something's throat. I shook my head, trying to clear away the thought. I was letting my imagination run away with me. They were just rocks, just stone that had been here for millions of years and would be here for millions more. Nothing sinister, nothing alive. Just rock. But the shadows they cast in my headlights seemed to move in ways that couldn't be explained by the motion of my truck. They shifted and flickered, creating the impression of shapes that vanished when I looked directly at them. I kept my eyes on the road, refusing to focus on the periphery where the shadows danced. The temperature gauge showed 17 degrees outside. Cold, but I'd driven in colder. The heater in the Cascadia was working fine, keeping the cab at a comfortable 65 degrees, but I still felt cold. A chill that seemed to seep in from somewhere deeper than the winter air. Around 5 o'clock a.m., at least according to my possibly broken clock, I saw brake lights ahead, not headlights, but brake lights. Red taillights cutting through the darkness, maybe a quarter mile up the road. Another vehicle. Finally, proof that I wasn't completely alone out here. I accelerated slightly, trying to catch up to them. They were moving, but slower than I was. I should have been able to close the distance quickly. But no matter how much I accelerated, the lights stayed the same distance ahead. A quarter mile, maybe less. Close enough to see clearly, too far away to identify what kind of vehicle it was. I tried flashing my high beams, the trucker's signal for "I'm here, I see you." The taillights didn't respond. They just kept moving at that same steady pace, maintaining that constant distance ahead of me. I pressed harder on the accelerator. The Cascadia's engine roared in response, the speedometer climbing to 60, then 65. Too fast for this grade, too fast for these curves. But I needed to catch those lights, needed to see another person, needed proof that this was all just some strange malfunction, and not something worse. The lights stayed ahead of me. Same distance. As if they were matching my speed exactly, staying just out of reach. I backed off the accelerator, slowing down to 50. The lights should have pulled away from me. Instead, they slowed too, maintaining that quarter-mile gap. I hit the brakes, bringing the Cascadia to a complete stop in the middle of the highway. If this was another truck, if this was a real vehicle, it would either stop too, or it would continue on and disappear around the next curve. Either way, I'd know. The taillights stopped. I could see them clearly in the distance, 2 red points of light in the darkness, unmoving, waiting. I sat there, engine idling, staring at those lights. My heart was hammering in my chest. This wasn't right. Real trucks don't stop in the middle of the highway for no reason. Real drivers don't match your speed perfectly, maintaining an exact distance. Real taillights don't wait for you. I put the truck in gear and started moving forward again, slowly this time. The lights started moving too, accelerating at exactly the same rate I was. We were synchronized, 2 vehicles moving in perfect unison through the darkness. I thought about my CB radio. I'd barely used it all night. There'd been no one to talk to. But if this was another trucker, maybe I could reach them on the CB. Channel 19 was the standard highway channel, the one everyone monitored. I reached for the CB handset and keyed the mic. Breaker 19, this is Ethan Briggs in the blue Freightliner. I'm seeing your taillights ahead of me on I-70 eastbound. You copy? Static. I released the mic and waited. Nothing but the hiss and crackle of dead air. I tried again. This is the blue Freightliner, calling the vehicle ahead of me on I-70. Please respond if you can hear me. More static. And then, cutting through the noise, a voice. Distorted, broken up, but definitely a voice. Still climbing, never stops. The same words I'd heard on the radio earlier. Or similar words, I couldn't be sure. Say again? I said into the mic. I didn't copy that. Please repeat. The voice came back, clearer this time, but still fragmented. Been driving for... how long? Can't remember. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. The voice sounded strained, exhausted, almost desperate. And something about it was familiar, though I couldn't place why. What's your 20? I asked, using trucker slang for location. Where are you? Don't know. Been on this road. Days, hours, can't tell anymore. I stared at the taillights ahead of me. Are you the truck in front of me? The one with the red taillights? Static, then, look behind you. I checked my mirrors immediately, a reflex action. The highway behind me was empty. Nothing but darkness and my own red taillights reflecting off the rock walls. There's nobody behind me, I said into the mic. You sure? Check again. I checked again, staring hard into my mirrors. Still nothing. Just empty road disappearing into the darkness. I don't see anyone, I said. The voice was almost a whisper now, barely audible through the static. Neither did I. The radio went dead. Not static, just dead silence. I tried keying the mic again, but there was no response, no static, nothing. The CB had gone completely silent, as if it had been unplugged. I looked back at the taillights ahead of me. They were still there, still maintaining that perfect quarter-mile distance. I wanted to believe they were real, that they belonged to another truck with another driver who was just as confused and lost as I was. But that voice on the radio, I tried to convince myself it had been a different truck, somewhere else on I-70, their transmission somehow bouncing around the mountains and reaching my radio by chance. But I couldn't make myself believe it. Something about that voice, about the exhaustion and fear in it, felt too close, too immediate. The highway continued to climb. I'd given up trying to understand the grade, trying to figure out where I actually was. I was somewhere in the Rockies, somewhere on I-70, and that was all I knew for certain. Everything else, the distance, the time, the fuel, had stopped making any kind of sense. Around 5:30 a.m., the sky should have been getting lighter. Dawn in January came around 7 o'clock a.m. in Colorado, which meant the eastern horizon should have been starting to show that pre-dawn glow, that gradual lightening that comes before the sun actually rises. But the sky was still black, still completely dark. I thought about the physics of it. Even if I was somehow driving west instead of east, even if every sign and every GPS reading was wrong and I'd gotten completely turned around, the sky should still be lightening. The sun doesn't care which direction you're facing. Dawn comes everywhere at roughly the same time, at least within a few hours. But there was no dawn. Just the same darkness I'd been driving through for the last 7 hours, 8 hours, however long it had actually been. The taillights ahead of me suddenly veered right, as if the vehicle was taking an exit. I looked for an exit ramp, but there was none. The lights just moved to the right side of the highway, slowed down, and stopped at what looked like a pull-off or emergency stopping area. I slowed down as I approached, my heart racing. This was it. I was going to see what vehicle those lights belonged to. I was going to see another person, talk to another driver, confirm that I wasn't completely alone out here. The pull-off was just a widening of the shoulder, a place where trucks could stop in an emergency. The tail lights were clearly visible, maybe 50 yards ahead of me now. I could see the outline of a vehicle in my headlights. It looked like a semi, similar to mine. Dark-colored, hard to tell exactly in the darkness. I pulled over behind it, leaving about 20 feet of space between us. I put the Cascadia in park and sat there for a moment, staring at the truck ahead of me. Its engine was running. I could see the exhaust vapor in the cold air, but I couldn't see anyone in the cab. The windows were dark. I debated what to do. Every instinct told me to stay in my truck, to not get out, to not approach that vehicle. But I needed to know. I needed to see another person, needed confirmation that this was all real and normal and explainable. I opened my door and stepped out into the cold. The air hit me like a physical force, colder than 17 degrees. Much colder. Cold enough to burn my lungs when I breathed in. I should have grabbed my jacket from behind the seat, but I'd left it there in my haste to get out. I walked toward the other truck, my boots crunching on the frozen ground. As I got closer, I could see it was indeed a semi, similar to my Freightliner but older, maybe from the early 2000s. The paint was faded, hard to tell what color it had originally been. The license plate was unreadable, covered in dirt or rust. "Hello?" I called out. My voice sounded strange in the still air, muffled somehow. "Anyone there?" No response. The truck's engine continued to idle, the exhaust creating small clouds in the frigid air. I walked around to the driver's side, approaching the door carefully. The window was dirty, hard to see through. I could make out the shape of the driver's seat, the steering wheel, the dash, but I couldn't see if anyone was inside. I reached up and knocked on the door. 3 sharp raps that echoed in the silence. Nothing. No movement, no response. I tried the door handle, expecting it to be locked. It wasn't. The door opened with a rusty creak, and warm air spilled out from the cab. The truck was empty. No driver, no logbook, no personal items. Just an empty cab with the engine running and the heater going. The keys were in the ignition. The radio was on, but silent, showing channel 19 on the display. I climbed up into the cab, trying to find some clue about who this truck belonged to, where they'd gone, why it was here. The glove box was empty. The sleeper berth behind the seats was empty too. No bedding, no clothes, nothing. It was as if someone had stripped the truck of everything personal before abandoning it here. I checked the odometer. 247,191 miles. The fuel gauge showed empty, the low fuel warning light glowing orange. But the engine was running, just like mine had kept running despite having no fuel. I climbed back down and walked around the truck, looking for any other clues. The trailer was empty too, the doors hanging open. No cargo, no identification marks, nothing to indicate what this truck had been hauling or where it had been going. That's when I noticed the tracks in the thin layer of frost on the ground. Footprints leading away from the driver's side door. They headed off into the darkness, perpendicular to the highway, toward the rock wall that rose up on the north side of the road. I followed them with my eyes as far as I could see. They went about 20 feet, maybe 30, and then just stopped. Not at the rock wall, not at any obstacle. They just ended, as if whoever had made them had simply vanished mid-step. I stood there, staring at those truncated footprints, feeling my heart hammer in my chest. This wasn't right. None of this was right. Trucks don't just appear on the highway with their engines running and no drivers. People don't leave footprints that end in the middle of nowhere. I walked back to my Cascadia quickly, no longer caring about investigating, no longer wanting to know. I just wanted to be back in my truck, moving forward, getting away from this place. I climbed into my cab and locked the door behind me. A useless gesture, but one that made me feel slightly safer. I put the truck in gear and pulled back onto the highway, watching the abandoned semi disappear in my mirrors. The taillights were back ahead of me. Same distance, same position. As if they'd never stopped, as if the whole encounter with the abandoned truck had never happened. But I'd seen it, I'd touched it. It had been real. I drove in silence for the next hour. No radio, no CB, nothing but the sound of my engine and the whisper of my tires on the pavement. The taillights stayed ahead of me, constant and unwavering. Around 6:30 a.m., according to my clock, I saw a sign, Eisenhower Tunnel. Miles. The same sign I'd been seeing for hours. The same promise of an end to this climb, this endless ascent through the darkness. But this time, something was different. This time, I could see a faint glow ahead, a lighter patch in the darkness. Not daylight, not yet, but something. A change in the quality of the darkness. A suggestion that maybe there was an end to this after all. The taillights ahead of me seemed to accelerate, pulling away slightly. For the first time all night, they were moving independently, not matching my speed exactly. They were heading toward that glow, toward whatever was ahead. I accelerated too, chasing them, desperate to reach that light. The glow grew brighter as I approached, and I could see now that it was the tunnel entrance. The Eisenhower Tunnel, finally, after all these hours. The lights that lined the tunnel entrance were on, creating that characteristic glow that was visible from miles away. The taillights ahead of me entered the tunnel and disappeared. I was maybe half a mile behind them now, close enough that I should catch up once we were both in the tunnel, close enough to finally see what vehicle they belonged to, close enough to maybe get some answers. I entered the tunnel and everything changed. The sound hit me first. My engine, which had been running smoothly for hours, suddenly seemed incredibly loud in the confined space of the tunnel. The sound bounced off the walls, creating echoes and reverberations that made it hard to think. The tunnel should have been 1.7 miles long. I'd driven through it hundreds of times, 8 minutes at cruising speed, maybe 10 if there was traffic. A straight shot through the Continental Divide, boring and routine, but something was wrong with the perspective. The tunnel seemed to stretch ahead of me farther than it should. The far end, just a distant point of light that didn't seem to get any closer as I drove. The walls were the same rough-hewn rock, the same curved ceiling, the same lights at regular intervals. But the distance felt wrong. The taillights I'd been following were gone. I should have been able to see them ahead of me, their red glow reflecting off the tunnel walls. But there was nothing. They'd vanished the moment I entered the tunnel, as if they'd never existed at all. I checked my speedometer. 55 miles per hour. A steady speed, not too fast, not too slow. I should have been covering a mile every 65 seconds or so. I counted in my head, watching the lights pass by overhead. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. The far end of the tunnel didn't seem any closer. 5 minutes, 8 minutes, 10 minutes. I should have been through the tunnel by now, emerging on the eastern side of the Continental Divide, beginning the long descent toward Denver. But I was still in the tunnel, still driving, still seeing the same rough walls and curved ceilings stretching endlessly ahead. The lights overhead started to flicker. Not all of them, just occasional lights here and there. They'd dim for a moment, then come back to full brightness, then dim again. I'd seen lights flicker in the tunnel before. Electrical issues, maintenance problems. But never in this pattern. Never this many at once. I checked my odometer out of habit, forgetting that it had stopped working. To my surprise, it was moving again. 178,675 miles. Then 178,826. Then 178,627. I was covering distance again, the numbers ticking up steadily with each passing moment. But the tunnel didn't end. I drove for another 15 minutes, 20 minutes, watching the odometer climb while the far end of the tunnel stayed exactly the same distance away. It was as if I was on some kind of treadmill, covering miles without actually going anywhere. My fuel gauge flickered and jumped from empty to full, then back to empty, then to 3/4. The needle moved randomly, unable to settle on any particular reading. Whatever electrical problem had plagued my instruments all night was getting worse. I tried the CB radio again. "This is Ethan Briggs, eastbound in the Eisenhower Tunnel. If anyone can hear me, please respond." Static. But there was something else underneath the static, a sound I couldn't quite identify. It was rhythmic, almost like breathing, heavy, labored breathing, as if someone was running or struggling. "Hello?" I said into the mic. "Is someone there?" The breathing continued, becoming slightly louder. And then, cutting through it, that same voice I'd heard before. "Still driving. Can't stop. If you stop, the transmission cut off." I waited, but there was nothing more. Just the breathing, steady and mechanical. "If I stop, what?" I said into the mic. "What happens if I stop?" No response. The breathing faded back into the static, and then the static itself faded into silence. The CB was dead again. I looked at the tunnel walls. In the flickering light, I started to notice patterns I hadn't seen before. The rock wasn't just random stone. There were shapes in it, almost like carvings. Not man-made carvings, nothing deliberate. Just natural formations that happened to look like faces or hands, or other shapes that my brain tried to interpret as meaningful. I forced myself to look away, to focus on the road ahead. Pareidolia, that's all it was. The human tendency to see faces and patterns in random shapes. I was tired, stressed, probably hallucinating from exhaustion. The shapes in the rock weren't real, but I kept seeing them in my peripheral vision. Faces in the stone, watching me pass. Hands reaching out from the walls. Shapes that moved when I wasn't looking directly at them. Freezing back into static rock formations when I turned my head. The temperature gauge on my dashboard started to climb. 80 degrees. 90 degrees. The engine was overheating, even though the cooling system had been working fine all night. I watched the gauge rise toward the red zone, toward the point where I'd have to stop or risk destroying the engine. I couldn't stop. Some instinct, some deep survival sense told me that stopping in this tunnel would be the worst possible thing I could do. I had to keep moving, had to keep driving, had to reach the far end no matter what. The temperature gauge hit the red zone. The engine should have been seizing up, should have been destroying itself from the heat, but it kept running, smooth and steady, as if the gauge was lying or the laws of thermodynamics had temporarily suspended themselves. I saw movement in my passenger side mirror, just a flicker, barely visible in the dim light. I looked at the mirror directly, but there was nothing there, just the tunnel wall sliding past, the same as on the driver's side. But I'd seen something, I was sure of it, a shape, a figure, something moving in the tunnel behind me. I stared at the mirror, watching, waiting for it to appear again. There, another flicker of movement. This time, I saw it clearly enough to make out details. It was tall, much taller than a person, and it was moving along the tunnel wall, not walking, moving in some other way, sliding or flowing, keeping pace with my truck. I accelerated, pushing the Cascadia up to 60, then 65. The shape in the mirror accelerated too, maintaining the same relative position. It was keeping up with me effortlessly despite the fact that I was driving at highway speed. I focused on the road ahead, refusing to look at the mirror. Whatever was back there, I didn't want to see it. I didn't want to know what it was or how it was moving. I just wanted to get through this tunnel and back into the open air. The lights overhead flickered more rapidly now, creating a strobe effect that made it hard to judge distance and speed. In the flickering darkness, the tunnel seemed to pulse, the walls moving closer and then farther away, as if the tunnel itself was breathing. My clock showed 7:14 a.m. I'd been in the tunnel for over half an hour. At my current speed, I should have driven through it multiple times over. I should have been 30 miles past the tunnel, well on my way to Denver. But I was still here, still surrounded by rock, still seeing that distant point of light that never got closer. The breathing on the CB radio started again, even though I hadn't keyed the mic. It came through the speaker uninvited, loud enough to be heard over the engine noise, that same heavy, labored breathing, as if something was struggling with great effort. And then, mixed in with the breathing, I heard other sounds. The rumble of a truck engine, slightly different from my own. The hiss of air brakes, the creak of a suspension. It sounded like another truck, driving somewhere nearby, close enough for its sounds to be picked up on the radio. "Who's there?" I said, not bothering with the mic this time. "Who is that?" The breathing paused. A moment of silence. Then the voice came back, clearer than before. "Been here so long? Forgot my name? Forgot where I was going? Where are you?" I asked. "In the tunnel. Always in the tunnel. Can't find the end. The Eisenhower Tunnel?" A sound that might have been a laugh. Bitter and hollow. Thought so at first. Not sure anymore. Might be a different tunnel. Might be all tunnels. I didn't know what that meant, but the way the voice said it made my skin crawl. All tunnels. As if every tunnel was the same tunnel. As if I-70 through the Rockies had somehow merged with every other tunnel in the world, creating a vast underground network that led nowhere. "How long have you been driving?" I asked. "Don't know. Days, weeks. Stopped counting. That's impossible. You'd run out of fuel. You'd have to sleep. Fuel gauge still shows empty. Been showing empty for, can't remember, but the engine keeps running, always keeps running." I looked at my own fuel gauge. It was still jumping erratically between empty and full, unable to settle on any reading. Just like the voice described, just like my own experience for the last several hours. "What's your name?" I asked, though I already suspected I didn't want to know the answer. Static, a long pause. Then, "Told you. Forgot my name. Forgot everything except the road. The tunnel, the lights that never end. There has to be a way out," I said, more to convince myself than to help whoever was on the other end of the radio. The tunnel has to end somewhere. That's what I thought. Kept driving, kept believing. but it never ends, just keeps going. And you keep driving because you can't stop. Why can't you stop? The voice went quiet. The breathing continued, but there were no more words. I waited, but the speaker remained silent, except for that rhythmic, mechanical breathing. I looked at the road ahead. The far end of the tunnel was still there, still that same distance away. I'd been driving for nearly 40 minutes now, covering what should have been dozens of miles, and I was no closer to the exit than when I'd entered. The shape in my mirror was back. I could see it more clearly now in the strobing lights. It was humanoid but wrong, too tall and too thin, with limbs that bent at angles that human limbs shouldn't bend. It moved along the tunnel wall like a spider, keeping pace with my truck, staying just at the edge of visibility. I tried to convince myself it wasn't real. Exhaustion, hallucination, that's all it was. I'd been driving for too long, under too much stress. My brain was creating images, seeing things that weren't there. If I could just make it through the tunnel, if I could just get back into open air, it would disappear. The tunnel started to narrow, not much, just enough to be noticeable. The walls were closing in slowly, making the space feel more confined. I checked the width of my truck, making sure I still had clearance on both sides. I did, but the margin was shrinking. Or maybe I was imagining that too. Maybe the tunnel was the same width it had always been, and my perception was just distorted by the flickering lights and the hours of driving through darkness. My clock showed 7:52 a.m. The sun should have been up by now. When I emerged from the tunnel, if I emerged from the tunnel, it should be full daylight. But I had a feeling, a certainty I couldn't explain, that it would still be dark, that the sun had stopped rising, or had never existed, or was simply somewhere else, somewhere I couldn't reach. The voice on the CB came back one more time, barely a whisper. See you soon. We all meet eventually. Everyone who enters meets where? I asked. Meets who? You'll see. Just keep driving. Can't stop now. Almost there. Almost where? But the voice was gone, replaced by silence. Not even static this time, just absolute silence. As if the radio had been disconnected from reality itself. The tunnel lights started to go out. Not flickering now, but actually going out, one by one, starting from behind me and moving forward. Darkness was chasing me, swallowing the tunnel section by section. I could see it in my mirrors, see the lights winking out in sequence, getting closer. I pressed the accelerator to the floor. The Cascadia surged forward, the engine roaring in protest. 70 miles per hour. 80. Too fast for a tunnel, dangerously fast. But I couldn't let that darkness catch me. Some instinct screamed at me that if the darkness caught up to my truck, if those lights went out while I was still in their section of tunnel, something terrible would happen. The darkness gained on me. The lights were going out faster than I could drive, the wave of blackness rushing toward me like a flood. I could see it in my mirrors, an absolute darkness that seemed to swallow even the reflections, as if it was consuming light itself. 90 miles per hour. The steering wheel shook in my hands. The engine temperature gauge was pinned in the red zone, but I couldn't slow down. The darkness was 50 yards behind me, 40 yards, 30, and then I saw it. The end of the tunnel rushing toward me. Not the distant point of light I'd been seeing for the last hour, but the actual end, the exit, the outside world. It was right there, maybe 100 yards ahead, and I was going to make it. The darkness was 10 yards behind me. The last few lights in my section of tunnel were flickering, about to go out. I could feel the cold radiating from the darkness, could sense something in it, something aware and hungry and patient. I shot out of the tunnel at 95 miles per hour, the Cascadia barely under control. I immediately hit the brakes, the engine brakes screaming as I tried to slow down. I was on the eastern side of the Continental Divide, the highway stretching ahead of me in the pre-dawn darkness. Pre-dawn darkness. I looked at the sky, and my heart sank. It wasn't daylight. It wasn't 8 o'clock a.m. on a January morning. The sky was still completely dark, still showing no sign that the sun would ever rise. I'd made it through the tunnel, but I hadn't escaped anything. I was still here, still in this endless night, still driving towards something I couldn't name. And in my rearview mirror, I could see the tunnel entrance behind me. The lights inside were all back on, bright and steady, as if nothing had happened. As if the darkness had never chased me. As if I'd imagined the whole thing. But I could still feel the cold. It had followed me out of the tunnel. A chill that had nothing to do with the January temperature. It was inside my truck now. Inside my bones. A cold that came from somewhere else. Somewhere that the sun had never reached. I put the truck back in gear and kept driving. What else could I do? Behind me was the tunnel. Ahead of me was the road. I had to keep moving forward. I had to believe that eventually, somewhere, this road would end. The highway descended now, dropping down from the Continental Divide toward what should have been the Denver Basin. I'd made this descent hundreds of times, knew every curve and grade. But in the darkness, with my instruments still malfunctioning and no other vehicles in sight, it felt like I was driving blind. My clock showed 8:23 a.m. Full daylight should have been blazing across the plains by now, the sun reflecting off the snow-covered peaks behind me. Instead, the darkness persisted, thick and absolute. Not the natural darkness of night, but something heavier, something that seemed to absorb my headlights rather than merely failing to reflect them. I tried my phone again. Still no signal. I tried the CB. Silence. I tried the regular radio, scanning through every station. Nothing but static, except for one frequency, 107.9 FM, where I could hear something underneath the noise. Music, maybe, or voices. It was too distorted to tell, but there was definitely something there. Something that rose and fell like human speech or melody. I left the radio on that station, letting the distorted sound fill the cab. It was better than silence, better than being alone with my thoughts. The odometer continued to climb. 178,744 miles. I'd driven over 300 miles since leaving Grand Junction, though my GPS, when I checked it, still showed me only about 60 miles from where I'd started. The numbers had stopped making any kind of sense. According to the GPS, I was approaching Georgetown, a small mountain town about 40 miles from Denver. I should have passed through Georgetown hours ago, long before I even reached the tunnel. But the GPS insisted I was just arriving now, and sure enough, I saw lights ahead. Town lights scattered along the hillside the way Georgetown's lights always looked from the highway. I should have driven past without stopping. Every instinct told me to keep moving, to not interact with whatever this place was. But my fuel gauge, currently showing 1/8 of a tank, reminded me that I had to stop eventually. Whether the gauge was accurate or not, whether my truck was running on fuel or something else entirely, I couldn't drive forever. I took the Georgetown exit. The off-ramp curved down and to the right, exactly the way I remembered. Everything looked normal. The road, the guardrails, the signs pointing toward the town. If I hadn't just spent the last 10 hours experiencing impossible things, I would have believed I was in the real Georgetown. The main street was empty. No cars, no pedestrians, no signs of life except for the lights burning in the windows of buildings. I drove slowly through town, looking for a gas station. I found one. The Shell station on the east end of town, the one I'd stopped at dozens of times before. I pulled up to the pumps and shut off my engine. The sudden silence was overwhelming. I sat there for a moment, listening to the tick of cooling metal, the faint hum of the gas station's lights. Everything seemed normal. Quiet, but normal. I got out of my truck, and that's when I noticed the cold again. The same cold I'd felt coming out of the tunnel, that bone-deep chill that had nothing to do with temperature. It was worse here, stronger, as if Georgetown, or whatever this place was pretending to be, was the source of it. The gas station appeared to be open. The lights were on, and through the windows I could see the interior. Shelves of snacks and drinks, a counter with a register, everything you'd expect. But I didn't see anyone inside. No clerk, no customers, no one. I approached the door slowly. It opened with electronic chime, the same cheerful ding you'd hear in any gas station. I stepped inside and immediately felt wrong about the decision. Everything was too perfect. The shelves were fully stocked, every product aligned and facing forward. The floor was spotless. The coffee machine behind the counter had a fresh pot brewing, the dark liquid dripping into the carafe. But there was no one here. No sign that anyone had been here recently. "Hello?" I called out. My voice echoed strangely in the small space. "Anyone here?" No response. I walked to the counter thinking maybe the clerk was in the back room. There was a small bell with a sign, "Ring for service." I rang it, and the tinny sound seemed too loud, too harsh. I waited. Nothing. No one came from the back. No one appeared from anywhere. I looked at the register. It was on, the display showing $0, and waiting for a transaction. I could ring myself up, could grab what I needed, and pay for it, and leave. But something stopped me. Something about the perfection of this place, the absolute absence of any human presence, made me not want to touch anything. I turned to leave, and that's when I saw it. On the window, written in what looked like condensation, were words, "Still climbing." The same words I'd heard on the CB radio. The same phrase that had been repeated throughout this endless night. But I hadn't written it. There'd been no condensation on the window when I'd entered. I backed toward the door, keeping my eyes on those words. They began to fade as I watched, the letters disappearing one by one, as if whatever force had written them was erasing them. Within seconds, they were gone completely, leaving just a clean, clear window. I left the gas station without looking back. I climbed into my truck, started the engine, and pulled back onto the main road. I didn't need gas. I'd drive until the truck stopped running, and if it never stopped running, then I'd just keep driving. As I passed through Georgetown, I noticed something else. The buildings weren't quite right. They looked like Georgetown's buildings, the same architecture, the same colors, the same general layout, but they were slightly off, like a copy made from memory rather than from direct observation. Windows in the wrong places. Doors that were too narrow or too wide. Details that were almost right, but not quite. And in every window, I saw lights. But I never saw people. No shadows moving inside the buildings. No cars parked on the streets. No signs of life anywhere. Just lights burning in empty buildings, illuminating nothing. I reached the end of town and merged back onto I-70 eastbound. The highway rose ahead of me, climbing again. This made no sense. The highway should have been descending here, dropping down toward the plains. But it was climbing, the grade increasing, as if I was heading back up into the mountains. My GPS had stopped working entirely. The screen showed nothing but a blue void. No roads, no landmarks. Just empty space with a small blue dot in the center. The dot was me, apparently, existing in a place that the GPS couldn't recognize or map. I checked my mirrors and saw something that made my blood run cold. Headlights. Multiple sets of headlights, maybe a dozen or more, all following me at exactly the same distance. They'd appeared the moment I'd left Georgetown, as if they'd been waiting for me. I accelerated. The headlights accelerated too, maintaining their perfect spacing. I slowed down. They slowed down. We were all synchronized again, all moving together through the darkness like a convoy of ghost trucks. I grabbed the CB mic, not really expecting it to work. "This is Ethan Briggs. Who's following me? Identify yourselves." To my surprise, the speaker crackled to life. But it wasn't one voice that responded. It was many voices, all speaking at once, overlapping and interfering with each other. "Been driving for days. Can't find the end. Fuel gauge shows empty, but engine keeps running. Saw something in the tunnel. It followed me out. Can't stop if you stop. Still climbing, always climbing. Forgot my name, forgot my—" I released the mic button, cutting off the cacophony of voices. But they continued anyway, bleeding through the speaker without me keying the transmission. Dozens of truckers, maybe hundreds, all describing the same experience. All trapped on this road, all driving through the same endless night. And I understood then what had happened. What was still happening. This wasn't a malfunction. This wasn't a hallucination from exhaustion. This was something else. Something that had been waiting in the Colorado mountains for who knows how long. A road that never ended. A night that never gave way to day. A journey that, once started, couldn't be stopped. The voices on the CB began to synchronize, their overlapping words forming a rhythm, almost a chant. "Still climbing, can't stop, still climbing, can't stop." I looked at my fuel gauge. Empty. I looked at my odometer. It had stopped again, frozen at 178,891 miles. I looked at the clock. 8:47 a.m., the numbers not changing, not ticking forward. Time had stopped, or I'd left time behind, or time had never existed on this road at all. The highway climbed ahead of me, disappearing into the darkness. Behind me, the headlights followed. A long chain of trucks driven by voices without names. Truckers who'd forgotten everything except the road and the endless climb and the darkness that never lifted. I should have been terrified. Some part of me was terrified. But another part, a growing part, felt something else. Acceptance, maybe. Or resignation, or just the exhaustion of fighting against something that couldn't be fought. My hands stayed on the wheel. My foot stayed on the accelerator. The Cascadia kept running, kept climbing, kept following the white lines that led nowhere and everywhere at once. I thought about Claire. Wondered if she was looking for me. I thought about Cole, the dispatcher. Wondered if he'd reported me missing. I thought about the other trucks that must have disappeared over the years, over the decades maybe. How many drivers had entered this road and never come back? How many were still here, still driving, still following those white lines? The voices on the CB faded to a murmur, then to silence. The headlights behind me began to spread out, each truck finding its own pace, its own rhythm. We were all alone together, each of us trapped in our own cab, our own private darkness, but connected by this road that had no beginning and no end. I reached for my thermos of coffee, but it was empty. I couldn't remember drinking it, couldn't remember when I'd last eaten or slept. Those things seemed irrelevant now. Part of a world I'd left behind when I'd entered the pass. The pass. That's what it was. Not the Eisenhower Tunnel, not Vale Pass, not any specific location. Just the pass. The passage from one state to another, one existence to another. And like all passages, it only went one way. The highway continued to climb. My truck continued to follow it. In the rearview mirror, I could see the tunnel entrance, impossibly far behind me, but still visible, its lights burning in the darkness. And I realized I could still see all of it. Georgetown, the tunnel, even the abandoned truck I'd found hours ago. All of it was still there, all visible at once, as if distance had lost its meaning. I was everywhere on this road at the same time. I was entering the pass, climbing through the tunnel, emerging on the other side, driving through Georgetown, ascending into the mountains. All of it happening simultaneously, my truck existing in all places and no place, my journey both ongoing and finished and never ending. The cold had settled deep into my bones now. I no longer noticed it, no longer felt it as something separate from myself. It was just part of the experience, part of the road, part of whatever I was becoming. I glanced at my passenger seat and saw something that hadn't been there before. A logbook, old and worn, filled with entries and handwriting I didn't recognize. I picked it up, one hand still on the wheel, and flipped through the pages. Dates from years ago, decades ago, routes that were familiar but wrong, destinations that didn't exist. And the same phrase repeated over and over in different handwriting, different pens, different degrees of desperation. Still climbing. I looked at the last entry, written in shaky letters that trailed off the page. Forgot my name. Forgot where I was going. But I remember the road. I'll always remember the road. There was a pen clipped to the logbook. I pulled over to the shoulder, though I didn't really stop moving, couldn't stop moving, and opened to a blank page. My hand moved almost automatically, writing words I didn't consciously choose. January 14th, Ethan Briggs, Grand Junction to Denver. Standard run, I-70 eastbound. Something wrong with the pass, can't find the end. Truck still running, fuel gauge empty. Others here too. I can see their lights. I stopped writing. I didn't know how to finish the sentence. We're all what? Trapped, lost, transformed? All of those things and none of them? I closed the logbook and set it back on the passenger seat. When I looked back at the road, I saw something new ahead. Not the tunnel, not Georgetown, but something else. A light brighter than the tunnel entrance, brighter than anything I'd seen in hours. It pulled me forward. I accelerated toward it without thinking, without choosing. The Cascadia surged ahead, the engine roaring, the speedometer climbing. 70, 80, 90. The light grew brighter, filling my windshield, filling my vision, filling everything. And then I was through it, and I was back at the beginning. Grand Junction. 9:47 p.m. My dispatcher Cole on the radio. Ethan, I got a Denver run for you. Needs to be there by 6 a.m. I looked at my odometer. 178,391 miles. My fuel gauge, full. My clock, exactly as it should be. Everything reset, everything beginning again. But I remembered. I remembered the tunnel, remembered Georgetown, remembered the voices in the cold and the endless climb. I remembered all of it, and I knew I was going to do it again. I was going to take the run, drive into the mountains, enter the pass. Not because I wanted to, but because I had to. Because this was the route now, the only route. Because I was part of it now, part of the road, part of the endless loop of trucks and drivers and nights that never ended. My hand reached for the CB mic. Yeah, Cole, I'll take it. Great. I-70's running clean tonight. Should be smooth. I pulled out of Grand Junction at exactly 9:47 p.m., my headlights cutting through the darkness. Ahead of me, the highway stretched towards the mountains, toward the pass, toward the tunnel that had no end, and the road that climbed forever. In my rear-view mirror, I caught a glimpse of my own eyes. They looked different, hollow, distant, like I was looking at myself from somewhere far away, from somewhere I could never reach again. I turned my attention back to the road. The white lines glowed in my headlights, leading me forward, leading me up. Behind me, I knew others would follow. They always did. The pass was always hungry, always waiting, always pulling in new trucks, new drivers, new voices to add to the chorus on Channel 19. And somewhere ahead, somewhere in the darkness, something was waiting for me. Something I'd met before and would meet again. Something that lived in the space between miles, in the gaps between seconds, in the cold that followed you out of tunnels that should have ended long ago. The highway climbed. I climbed with it. And in the distance, faint but growing clearer, I could hear the voices starting up again on the CB, that familiar chant that was both warning and welcome. Still climbing, can't stop. Still climbing, can't stop. I didn't reach for the mic. I didn't need to. I was already part of the chorus. I was already home. My name is Mason Briggs. No relation to any other Briggs you might know in the trucking world. Been hauling freight for 16 years, the last 9 exclusively on Colorado routes. I prefer night driving. Less traffic, cooler temperatures for the engine, and something about the way the mountains look in the dark that I've never been able to shake. Some drivers hate the night shift. Me, I've never felt comfortable driving in daylight. It was February 3rd, a Tuesday, when I picked up a load in Pueblo heading north to Fort Collins. Standard run, nothing complicated. 3 pallets of restaurant equipment, industrial refrigerators, prep tables, that kind of thing. The load was solid, properly secured, weight distribution perfect. I'd checked it twice before leaving the warehouse at 11:23 p.m. My rig was a 2018 Peterbilt 579, forest green with chrome accents. I'd bought her used 3 years ago from a driver named Hayes who was retiring. She had 281 miles on her when I got her, now sitting at just over 420,000. The engine ran smooth, the transmission shifted clean, and the cab was comfortable enough for the long hauls. Only issue was the CB radio. It had a tendency to pick up interference in the mountains, random bursts of static that would cut through whatever channel you were on. Hayes had warned me about it. Said he'd tried replacing the antenna twice, but it never fixed the problem. I'd learned to live with it. The route was simple. I-25 northbound through Colorado Springs, up through the Denver metro area, then continuing north to Fort Collins. Normally a 4-hour drive, maybe 5 with stops. I wasn't planning on stopping. I had a full thermos of coffee, half a pack of beef jerky, and a playlist of classic rock that would get me through the night. In and out. Delivery by 4 a.m., home before sunrise. I merged onto I-25 just before midnight. The highway was quiet, a few scattered cars, one other semi about a mile ahead of me. The night was clear, temperature around 28 degrees. Cold, but not brutal. No snow in the forecast, no wind to speak of. Perfect conditions for a night run. Pueblo disappeared in my mirrors, the lights of the city fading into the darkness behind me. Ahead of me, the highway stretched north through open country, the land rising gradually toward Colorado Springs and the mountains beyond. On a clear night like this, you could see the lights of Colorado Springs from 30 miles away, a glow on the northern horizon that got brighter as you approached. I settled into my seat, adjusted the mirrors, and found a comfortable position for my right arm on the armrest. This was the part of the job I actually enjoyed, the solitude, the rhythm of the road, the simple act of driving through the night while the rest of the world slept. No dispatchers calling, no loading dock supervisors rushing you, no traffic to fight, just you and the truck and the highway. The CB radio was on Channel 19, the standard highway channel. It was quiet tonight, just the occasional burst of static from my antenna issue. Every few minutes the speaker would crackle with interference, a brief hiss of white noise that would fade back to silence. I'd gotten used to it, barely noticed it anymore. I passed through Fountain around 12:35 a.m., a small town on the southern edge of Colorado Springs. The other semi I'd been following took the exit there, his taillights disappearing down the ramp. I watched him go, and then I was alone on the highway. Just me and the empty road and the lights of Colorado Springs getting closer. That's when I first heard it. A voice on the CB cutting through the static. Just a few words, broken up and distorted. "Channel 19. Anyone copy?" I grabbed the mic, keying it out of habit. "This is Mason Briggs northbound on I-25. I copy you. What's your 20? Static. No response. I waited, but there was nothing. Just the usual interference from my antenna, the same white noise I'd been hearing all night. I hung the mic back on the clip and kept driving. Probably just some trucker on a different stretch of I-25, their transmission bouncing off the mountains in some weird way. It happened sometimes in Colorado. The terrain could do strange things to radio signals, make them carry farther than they should or twist them into unusual patterns. I entered Colorado Springs proper around 12:50 a.m. The city was quiet. Most of the businesses closed. Just the occasional gas station or fast food place still lit up. I stayed on I-25, bypassing the city center, following the highway as it curved northwest toward Denver. The voice came back clearer this time. "Northbound on I-25, need help, equipment failure." I keyed the mic again. "This is Mason Briggs. What's your location? What kind of equipment failure?" Again, static, no response. I scanned the highway ahead and behind me, looking for another truck. Nothing. The road was completely empty except for me. "If you can hear me," I said into the mic, "I'm northbound on I-25 just north of Colorado Springs. If you're broken down somewhere, give me a mile marker and I'll call it in." Silence. I released the mic and frowned at the radio. The signal had sounded close, like whoever was transmitting was nearby. But there were no other trucks visible, no vehicles on the shoulder, nothing to indicate anyone was in the area. I checked my mirrors again, paying closer attention this time. The highway behind me was dark and empty. Ahead of me, the road rose gradually into the foothills, the distant lights of Monument visible on a ridge to the northwest. Everything looked normal. The CB crackled again. This time the voice was different. Not clearer, but different. The tone had changed, or maybe the cadence. It was hard to tell through the static. "Been trying to reach hours now. Can anyone hear?" "I can hear you," I said into the mic. "You're breaking up pretty bad, but I'm receiving your transmission. What do you need?" Nothing, just static. I tried a different approach. "What channel are you on? I'm on 19. If you're on a different channel, we might be getting crossed signals." The static continued for a moment, then faded. I waited, watching the radio display, but it stayed silent. Whatever had been transmitting was gone now. I passed through Monument around 1:15 a.m. The highway climbed here, rising into the foothills of the Rockies. To my west, I could see the dark shapes of the mountains, massive and silent against the night sky. No lights out there, just solid darkness, the wilderness that started where civilization ended. My fuel gauge showed 3/4 full. I'd filled up in Pueblo before loading, had plenty to make it to Fort Collins and back. The engine temperature was normal, oil pressure good, everything running smoothly. The Peterbilt was in her element on these gradual climbs, the engine pulling steadily without strain. I thought about the voice on the radio. Something about it bothered me, though I couldn't articulate what. It had sounded desperate, or maybe just tired. Truckers in trouble usually sounded angry or frustrated, not desperate, and the way they kept trying to reach someone, kept transmitting even though they weren't getting responses, that didn't fit the pattern either. Most drivers would try a few times, then switch to a phone if the radio wasn't working. Unless their phone wasn't working either. Unless they were somewhere without cell service. Somewhere remote. But I-25 through this stretch had decent coverage. I pulled out my phone and checked. 4 bars. Full LTE. If someone was broken down on this highway, they could call for help. The voice came back, and this time it made me grip the steering wheel harder. Mason Briggs, can you hear me? Mason, they'd used my name. I hadn't imagined that. The voice had clearly said my name, twice. I keyed the mic, trying to keep my voice steady. Yeah, I hear you. How do you know my name? Static. Then, you said it. You told me. Don't you remember? I said my name when I responded to you, I said slowly. But who are you? What's your name? The static grew louder, almost overwhelming. Through it, I could barely make out words. Can't remember. Been too long. But I know you said Mason Briggs. Northbound I-25. I felt a chill run down my spine. The voice was repeating back exactly what I'd said earlier, word for word, like a recording, or like someone who had nothing else to say, who could only repeat what they'd heard. Where are you? I asked. Give me a landmark, something I can use to find you. Northbound I-25, the voice said again. Northbound I-25. I released the mic and stared at the radio. Something was very wrong here. This wasn't a normal radio conversation, wasn't a normal equipment failure. The way the voice kept repeating phrases, the way it knew my name but couldn't give me any other information. It felt off. I scanned the highway again, more carefully this time. Still nothing. No vehicles, no lights, no signs of anyone else on the road. The highway stretched ahead of me, climbing gradually through the darkness toward Castle Rock and eventually Denver. Around 1:45 a.m., I passed Castle Rock. The outlet malls on either side of the highway were dark, the parking lots empty. A few streetlights illuminated the exit ramps, but otherwise the town was asleep. I stayed on I-25, maintaining my speed, watching the mile markers tick by. That's when I noticed something strange. My odometer reading didn't match the mile markers I was passing. According to my odometer, I'd driven about 68 miles since leaving Pueblo. But the mile markers showed I was at milepost 184, which should have been about 73 miles from Pueblo. 5 miles off. I tried to think of explanations. Maybe the odometer was slightly inaccurate, or maybe I'd misread the starting mile marker in Pueblo. But I knew these roads well, knew the distances. The numbers should have matched up. The CB crackled again. 5 miles, the voice said. Always 5 miles, can't close the distance. I grabbed the mic without thinking. What do you mean 5 miles? 5 miles from what? From you, the voice said. Clearer now. I can see your lights. But I can't reach you, always 5 miles behind. I checked my mirrors immediately. The highway behind me was empty, had been empty for over an hour. There were no headlights, no vehicles, nothing. There's nobody behind me, I said into the mic. I don't see any lights. I see yours, the voice insisted. Red taillights, green truck, Peterbilt. I've been following you. My hands tightened on the wheel. How did they know what kind of truck I was driving? How did they know the color? I hadn't mentioned that, hadn't described my rig at all. Who is this? I demanded. How do you know what my truck looks like? Static. Then so faint I almost missed it. Because I'm you. I nearly dropped the mic. What? Or, you're me? The voice continued, still barely audible. Can't tell any more. Been driving too long. The road loops. Everything loops. You're not making sense, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Just tell me where you are and I'll... Where you are? The voice interrupted. Always where you are, 5 miles behind, but the distance never changes. I accelerate, you accelerate. I slow down, you slow down. I looked at my speedometer. 70 miles per hour, the speed I'd been maintaining for most of the trip. I'd been using cruise control, holding a steady pace. If someone was actually behind me, matching my speed exactly, they'd have to be using cruise control too, or they'd have to be... I pushed the thought away. This was just some kind of radio prank, or maybe someone having a mental breakdown. It wasn't real. It couldn't be real. Listen, I said into the mic. I don't know what's going on with you, but happened to you too, the voice cut in. Started with the static, then the voice. Then you realized the highway doesn't end. It just loops, and you're stuck. We're all stuck. I hung up the mic and turned off the CB radio. My heart was pounding, my palms sweaty on the steering wheel. This was getting too weird, too unsettling. Better to just drive in silence, complete the delivery, and forget this whole thing happened. But even with the radio off, I could still hear it. Faintly, impossibly, the voice was still coming through the speaker. Not as loud as before, but definitely there. Can't turn it off, the voice whispered. Tried that, doesn't work. It follows you, always follows. I reached over and physically disconnected the CB's power cable, pulling it right out of the unit. The display went dark. The speaker went silent. I drove in silence for the next 10 minutes, forcing myself to focus on the road, on the simple act of driving. The highway continued north, passing through the southern suburbs of Denver. Lights appeared on either side of the road. Houses, businesses, gas stations. Civilization. Normal, everyday civilization. My hands stopped shaking. My heartbeat slowed. Whatever that had been, it was over now. Just some strange interference, some weird atmospheric condition that made the CB pick up old transmissions or bounce signals around in unexpected ways. I'd heard of that happening, radio signals from years ago suddenly appearing, playing back conversations that had happened long before. That's when I saw the truck. Not behind me, ahead of me. Parked on the shoulder, hazard lights flashing. A Peterbilt, older model, dark-colored. Hard to tell the exact color in the darkness, but it looked green. It looked green. I slowed down as I approached, my chest tightening. This was just a coincidence. Lots of trucks on the road, lots of Peterbilts. Plenty of them were green. This didn't mean anything. But as I drew closer, I could see details. Chrome accents on the grille. A specific pattern of running lights. A small dent in the front bumper, driver's side, from where I'd clipped a parking barrier 6 months ago. I stopped my truck about 50 yards behind the parked Peterbilt. I sat there, engine idling, staring at it in disbelief. It was identical to my truck. Not similar, identical, down to the dent in the bumper. I reached for the CB power cable, my hands shaking again. I plugged it back in. The radio came to life immediately, and the voice was already talking. See it now, the voice was saying. See yourself. See what you'll become. If you don't turn around, if you don't go back, this isn't real, I said out loud, not even bothering with the mic. This is not real. Thought that too, the voice replied, somehow hearing me even though I wasn't transmitting. Kept driving. Thought I could reach Denver, thought I could finish the delivery. But the road never ends. It just loops back, and you end up behind yourself. Always 5 miles behind. I stared at the truck ahead of me. Its hazard lights continued to flash, steady and rhythmic. I couldn't see if anyone was in the cab. The windows were too dark, the angle too steep. I put my truck in gear and slowly drove forward, pulling up alongside the parked Peterbilt. I looked over at the driver's side window, trying to see inside. The window was too dark. Or maybe it wasn't glass at all, just solid darkness where a window should have been. I couldn't tell which. I accelerated past the truck, not looking back, not checking my mirrors. I just drove, pushing the Peterbilt up to 80 miles per hour, needing to put distance between myself and whatever that had been. In my side mirror, I watched the parked truck recede into the distance. Its hazard lights continued to flash, getting smaller and smaller until they disappeared entirely. I kept driving for another 5 minutes before I let myself slow down to a normal speed. My clock showed 2:17 a.m. I should have been getting close to Denver by now, should have been seeing the glow of the city lights on the horizon, but it was still dark ahead, just highway and open land and the distant silhouette of the mountains. The CB crackled back to life, even though I hadn't touched it, hadn't said anything. "Still driving," the voice said quietly. "Me too, always driving. See you in 5 miles." I drove for another 20 minutes in silence, refusing to acknowledge the radio, refusing to look at my mirrors more than necessary. The highway continued north through the darkness, passing through what should have been the southern edge of Denver. But I didn't see the city. No glow on the horizon, no increase in traffic, no signs of the metro area I had driven through 1,000 times. Just dark highway and scattered lights that could have been anywhere. Around 2:40 a.m. I saw a sign. Denver, 35 miles. That was wrong. According to my calculations, I should have been entering Denver by now, maybe even passing through it. I'd been driving for over 3 hours from Pueblo at highway speeds. Denver should have been behind me, not ahead of me. I checked my odometer. 420 was 143 miles. That meant I'd driven about 143 miles since leaving Pueblo. Pueblo to Denver was roughly 115 miles. I should have passed through Denver 20 miles ago. But the sign said I still had 35 miles to go. I thought about exiting the highway, finding a truck stop, maybe calling my dispatcher. But every exit I passed looked wrong somehow. The signs were there, the usual green highway signs marking towns and services, but when I looked down the exit ramps I couldn't see anything. Just darkness, as if the ramps led nowhere. The CB came back to life. Different voice this time. Or maybe the same voice, but changed somehow. "Made that mistake," it said. "Took an exit. Drove for hours. Never found anything. Just looped back to the highway. Same spot. Like the exit doesn't really go anywhere." I grabbed the mic, my frustration overriding my fear. "What do you want? Why are you doing this?" "Not doing anything," the voice replied. "Just warning you. Don't exit. Don't stop. Keep driving north. It's the only way." "The only way to what?" "To Denver. To the end. Except there is no end. Just the loop. But you have to keep driving anyway. If you stop..." The transmission cut off abruptly. I waited, but it didn't come back. I stared at the radio, at the Channel 19 display glowing in the darkness of the cab. "If I stop, what?" I said into the mic. "What happens if I stop?" No response. The radio remained silent for the next 10 minutes. I drove through that silence, watching the mile markers, watching my odometer, trying to make the numbers make sense. They didn't. The distance I was covering didn't match the mile markers I was passing. It was as if the highway itself was stretching, adding miles that shouldn't exist. I passed a sign for Castle Rock, 12 miles south. But I'd passed through Castle Rock almost an hour ago. I was north of it, heading toward Denver. The sign should have said I was 40 or 50 miles north of Castle Rock, not 12 miles. I was looping back. Somehow, impossibly, the highway was looping back on itself. taking me past the same landmarks I'd already passed. But I hadn't turned around. I'd been driving straight north the entire time, never exited, never turned. The CB crackled. "Understand now," the voice said. "You're starting to see it, the loop." "How is this possible?" I asked. "Roads don't loop. Highways don't just curve back on themselves." "This one does," the voice said. "Or maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's time that loops. Maybe you're driving through the same hour over and over. Can't tell anymore." I looked at my clock. 2:58 a.m. I tried to remember what time it had shown earlier. Tried to track whether time was moving forward normally. But I couldn't remember. The numbers all blurred together. Hours and minutes that might have been counting up or might have been stuck, repeating. "How long have you been on this road?" I asked. Static. Then, "Don't know. Feels like forever. Feels like I just started. Both at the same time. That doesn't make sense." "Nothing makes sense," the voice agreed. "But you keep driving anyway. Because what else can you do?" I wanted to argue. Wanted to insist that I could stop, could turn around, could break free of whatever this was. But something deep in my gut told me the voice was right. Stopping felt dangerous in a way I couldn't articulate. The thought of pulling over, of sitting still on this highway, filled me with a dread that had no rational explanation. So I kept driving. I passed through Monument again. The same lights on the same ridge I'd seen over an hour ago. I passed through Castle Rock again. The same outlet, malls dark and empty. I was retracing my route, driving through places I'd already been, but without ever turning around. The voice on the CB started talking more frequently now, offering observations and warnings in disconnected bursts. "Watch for the mile markers. They'll start going backward. Fuel gauge doesn't matter anymore. Tank never empties. Sometimes you'll see other trucks. They're all stuck too, all looping. Don't try to catch them. You never can. Distance stays the same." Each transmission made the situation feel more real, more inescapable. I was caught in something I didn't understand, something that defied the basic rules of physics and geography. And I wasn't alone. How many other drivers were out here, looping through the same stretch of highway, unable to reach their destinations? Around 3:30 a.m., or what my clock claimed was 3:30 a.m., I started seeing other vehicles. Not many, just one or two at a time, always far ahead or far behind. Headlights in my mirrors that never got closer. Taillights ahead that never got farther away. They maintained perfect distances, as if we were all synchronized, all moving at exactly the same speed through exactly the same loop. I tried the CB, calling out to them. "This is Mason Briggs. If any other drivers can hear me, please respond. I'm northbound on I-25 and something's wrong with the road." Multiple voices answered at once, overlapping and interfering. "Wrong with all of us. Been here since Tuesday, or maybe Thursday. Thought I was alone. Then saw the lights. Fuel gauge says empty but still running. Passed Denver 3 times. Never reached it. If you see exit 167, don't take it. Leads nowhere. Same with 181. Just loops back." The cacophony of voices faded back into static. I tried to ask follow-up questions, tried to get specific information, but none of them responded directly. They just transmitted fragments, pieces of their experiences, warnings that might or might not be relevant. I started keeping closer track of the mile markers. The voice had been right. They were going backward. I'd pass mile 184, then 183, then 182, counting down as I drove north. It was as if the highway numbering system had reversed itself, or as if I was driving south while my compass and the road itself insisted I was going north. My fuel gauge started to fluctuate. It would drop to half, then jump back to full, then drop to a quarter, then back to full. The engine never sputtered, never showed any signs of running out of fuel. It just kept running, steady and strong, regardless of what the gauge said. Around 4 a.m., I saw the parked truck again, the green Peterbilt with the chrome accents and the dent in the bumper. It was in the same spot, on the shoulder, hazard lights flashing. As if I'd looped all the way back to that exact location, or as if the truck had somehow moved to intercept me again. This time, I didn't stop. I drove past it at 70 miles per hour, not looking at the cab, not trying to see inside. In my mirror, I watched the hazard lights recede into the distance, and I felt a small sense of relief when they disappeared entirely. The CB came to life immediately. "Saw yourself again," the voice said. "Happens every loop. You'll get used to it." "I don't want to get used to it," I said. "I want to get off this highway." "So did I," the voice replied. "Tried everything. Every exit, every rest area, they all loop back, or they go nowhere, just darkness. There has to be a way out." "Maybe," the voice said, sounding less certain. "Or maybe this is the way out. Maybe we're already out, and everything else is the loop." I didn't know what that meant. Didn't want to think about what it implied. I focused on driving, on maintaining my speed, on following the white lines that divided the lanes. The voice continued, unprompted. "Sometimes I think I died, crashed somewhere back in the real world. And this is what comes after, just driving forever. Same road, same night." "We didn't die," I said firmly, though I wasn't sure I believed it. "We're just trapped, temporarily. There's an explanation for this. A rational explanation." "Like what?" "I don't know. Atmospheric phenomenon, magnetic anomaly, something that's affecting our perceptions, making us think we're looping when we're actually making progress," the voice finished. "Check your odometer." I did. It showed 420,143 miles, the exact same number it had shown over an hour ago. I'd been driving for an hour, maintaining highway speed, and the odometer hadn't moved at all. Or it had moved and then reset, looping back to the same number. "This isn't possible," I said quietly. "And yet," the voice replied. I drove in silence for a while, trying to think. There had to be something I was missing, some factor I hadn't considered. Roads didn't loop back on themselves. Time didn't repeat. Odometers didn't reset. These were basic facts of reality, things you could count on, unless you couldn't. Unless you were in a place where those rules didn't apply. The mountains loomed to my west, dark shapes against the slightly less dark sky. I'd been watching them all night, using them as a reference point to confirm I was heading north. They'd stayed on my left the entire time, exactly where they should be if I was traveling northbound on I-25. But what if they weren't real? What if they were just images, projections, something designed to make me think I was going the right direction? What if everything outside my windshield was artificial, a simulation or hallucination designed to keep me driving forever? I shook my head, trying to clear away the thought. That way lay madness. I had to believe in something, had to trust some aspect of reality. If I started questioning whether the mountains were real, whether the highway was real, I'd lose my grip entirely. The CB crackled. "That's the trap," the voice said, as if reading my thoughts. "You start questioning everything, and then you can't trust anything, and then you just drive, because it's the only thing you can still do." "How long have you been out here?" I asked. "Really? How long?" A pause. "Don't know. Clock says hours. Feels like days. Could be years. Time doesn't work right here." "Here? Where is here exactly?" The loop, the road, the place between. The voice paused again. You'll understand eventually, or you won't. Doesn't matter either way, you'll keep driving. I wanted to argue, wanted to insist that I'd find a way out, that I wouldn't just accept this. But part of me was starting to doubt, starting to wonder if the voice was right, if this was just the way things were now. An endless loop, an eternal highway, a night that never gave way to dawn. I checked the horizon, still dark. No hint of sunrise, even though it was past 4:00 a.m. In February, in Colorado, the sky should have been starting to lighten by now, that gradual transition from black to deep blue to gray. But there was nothing. Just the same solid darkness that had been there since I'd left Pueblo. Pueblo. I tried to remember leaving Pueblo, tried to recall specific details. The warehouse, the loading dock, the 3 pallets of restaurant equipment. But the memories felt distant, uncertain, like something I'd read about rather than experienced directly. Had I actually left Pueblo? Or had I been on this highway forever? My memories of a starting point, just another part of the loop, another illusion designed to keep me sane enough to continue driving? The CB interrupted my thoughts. Stop wondering, the voice said. Doesn't help, just makes it worse. Accept it. Keep driving, that's all you can do. Is that what you did? Accepted it? Eventually, the voice admitted. Fought it at first, tried everything, but nothing worked. So yes, accepted it, still driving, still here. And you're okay with that? A long pause. Then, no, not okay. Never okay. But what choice do I have? The question hung in the air, unanswerable. What choice did any of us have? If the highway truly was looping, if there was no exit, no escape, no way to reach a destination, what could we do except keep driving? Around 4:30 a.m., I saw a sign I hadn't seen before. Rest area, 2 miles. I didn't remember any rest areas on this stretch of I-25. I'd driven this route dozens of times, knew every exit and service. There was no rest area here, but the sign was real. I could see it clearly in my headlights, the standard green highway sign marking the distance to a rest area. 2 miles ahead. The voice on the CB spoke up immediately. Don't stop there, trust me, don't stop. Why not? I asked. What's wrong with it? It's not real, or it's too real, can't explain, just don't stop, keep driving past it. What happens if I stop? Don't know. Never stopped. Too afraid, but others have. They don't come back on the radio, they just disappear. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, watching for the rest area. Part of me wanted to stop, wanted to pull off and investigate, wanted to see what would happen. But a larger part, the part that had kept me alive through 16 years of trucking, told me to listen to the warning. The rest area appeared on my right, exactly 2 miles from the sign. It looked normal, a standard Colorado highway rest area with parking spaces for cars and trucks, a small building for restrooms, some picnic tables. The lights were on, illuminating the parking lot with that familiar orange sodium glow. But something was off about it. The shadows were too dark, the angles too sharp. And there were no other vehicles in the parking lot. No cars, no trucks, nothing. Just empty pavement and those harsh orange lights casting shadows that seemed to move independently. I drove past it, accelerating slightly, eager to put distance between myself and whatever that place was. In my mirror, I watched it recede, and I could swear the lights flickered, as if acknowledging my decision to keep going. Good, the voice said. You're learning. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it is wrong. What was that place? Told you, don't know. Just know it's bad. Others went there, didn't come back. That's enough for me. I drove for another 15 minutes, the rest area fading from my mirrors. fading from my thoughts. The highway continued its endless loop, the mile markers counting down, the landmarks repeating. Castle Rock again, Monument again, Colorado Springs ahead, the lights of the city appearing on the horizon just like they had hours ago. Except this time something was different. This time, as I approached Colorado Springs, I could see other trucks. Not just distant headlights, but actual trucks, close enough to identify. 3 of them, spread out along the highway, all heading north like me. All maintaining that perfect spacing, that synchronized distance. I grabbed the CB mic. "This is Mason Briggs to the northbound trucks ahead of me. Do you copy?" 3 voices answered, overlapping. "Copy that. We see you. Welcome to the convoy." "How long have you all been out here?" I asked. The answers came back, fragmented and uncertain. "Since Tuesday, I think. 3 days. Or 3 hours. Does it matter? We're all here now." I thought about that. Did it matter? Whether I'd been driving for hours or days or years, the result was the same. I was here, on this highway, unable to escape. The specific duration seemed almost irrelevant compared to the fact of my imprisonment. "Is there any way out?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "If there is, we haven't found it. Tried everything, every exit, every rest area. Even tried crashing, didn't work. Truck just kept going, like hitting a wall that isn't there." That last comment made my blood run cold. Someone had tried to crash deliberately, hoping it would break the loop, and it hadn't worked. The truck had kept going, indestructible or invulnerable or simply not allowed to stop. "So we just drive?" I said. "Forever?" "Until we don't," one of the voices replied cryptically. "What does that mean?" "You'll see. Eventually, we all see." When the loop finally... The transmission cut off. I waited for them to continue, but the radio went silent. The 3 trucks ahead of me continued north, their taillights glowing in the darkness, and I followed them because there was nothing else to do. Somewhere around 5 o'clock a.m., though I was no longer certain that time meant anything on this highway, the CB radio began to change. The static underneath the transmissions grew louder, more persistent. And within that static, I started to hear other things. Not voices exactly, but sounds that might have been voices. Might have been something else entirely. Whispers. Hundreds of them. Thousands maybe. All talking at once in frequencies just below the threshold of comprehension. I couldn't make out individual words. Couldn't isolate specific speakers. It was just a wall of overlapping sound, a chorus of something that might have been human or might have been the road itself, speaking in a language I didn't understand. I turned down the volume on the CB, but it didn't help. The whispers continued at the same level, as if the volume control no longer affected them. I tried changing channels, scanning through the entire band from 1 to 40. Every channel had the same whispers, the same incomprehensible chorus. "Hear them now," the familiar voice said, cutting through the whispers. "They've been waiting for you to listen." "What are they?" I asked. "The others," the voice replied. "Everyone who came before. Everyone who got stuck. All of them still here. All of them still trying to reach out." I looked at the 3 trucks ahead of me, their taillights steady in the darkness. Are those drivers part of the whispers? Some of them. Eventually. When you've been here long enough, you stop being able to form words. You just become part of the static, part of the road. The thought terrified me more than anything else I'd experienced so far. Not just being trapped, but losing myself gradually, dissolving into static and whispers until I wasn't Mason Briggs anymore. Just another voice in the chorus, another ghost on Channel 19. "How long does that take?" I asked. "How long until you lose yourself?" "Don't know. Different for everyone. Some fade fast, some hold on. I'm still here, still me." I think the uncertainty in that last word was heartbreaking. The voice didn't know if it was still itself, if the person who had started this journey still existed, or if they'd already been replaced by something else wearing their memories like a disguise. The whispers grew louder. I could almost make out words now, fragments that rose briefly above the general noise. "Help us. Can't stop. Driving forever. Forgot my name. Where's Denver? No exit." Each fragment was a story. A driver who had ended up here, who had become part of the highway's endless loop. How many were there? How many trucks had disappeared over the years, vanishing into this impossible road, their drivers still broadcasting long after they should have stopped? I passed a sign, Colorado Springs, 15 miles. The same distance I'd seen before, hours ago. The loop was tightening, the landmarks repeating faster. Or maybe time was compressing, each circuit taking less subjective time even though the distance remained the same. The 3 trucks ahead of me suddenly changed formation. Instead of maintaining their spacing, they started to cluster together, moving into the same lane, their taillights merging into a single, bright point. And then, as I watched in my headlights, they seemed to flicker, to become translucent. I could see through them to the highway beyond, as if they were projections rather than solid objects. "Happening to you too," the voice on the CB said. "The fade. When you've been here long enough, you stop being fully real, start becoming part of the road. I've only been here a few hours," I protested. "Time doesn't work that way here. Few hours feels like forever. Forever feels like few hours." I looked at my hands on the steering wheel. They looked solid, normal. I looked at the dashboard, the windshield, the mirrors. Everything seemed real, seemed tangible. But maybe that was just how it appeared from inside. Maybe to someone looking at my truck from outside, I was already starting to fade, already becoming transparent. The CB erupted with activity, dozens of voices, all talking at once. "New driver on the loop. Fresh signal, strong signal. Hasn't faded yet. Tell us your name. Tell us while you remember. Who are you? Who were you?" I keyed the mic, my voice shaking. "Mason Briggs. I'm Mason Briggs. I'm hauling restaurant equipment from Pueblo to Fort Collins. I left at 11:23 p.m. on February 3rd. I'm real. I'm still real." The voices responded, overlapping. "Yes? Real? We were all real. Remember being real. Mason Briggs. Remember that name? Hold on to it. Don't let the road take it. It takes everything eventually." I drove through Colorado Springs for what felt like the 4th or 5th time, the city lights scrolling past on either side of the highway. Each time I passed through, it looked slightly different. Buildings in different positions. Streets that didn't connect quite right. As if the road was assembling a Colorado Springs from memory, getting some details right and others wrong. The whispers and the static were forming patterns now. Rhythms that might have been words if I listened carefully enough. I found myself trying to decode them, trying to hear the individual voices within the chorus. But every time I focused on one voice, it would slip away, replaced by another, then another, an endless procession of drivers who had lost their names, but not their need to communicate. Around 5:30 a.m., my headlights started to dim. Not gradually, but in pulses. They'd drop to half brightness, then return to normal, then drop again. The rhythm was irregular, almost random, making it hard to see the road ahead. I checked the electrical system. Everything showed normal. The alternator was charging. The battery voltage was good. There was no reason for the lights to be failing. "It's starting," the voice on the CB said. "The dissolution. physical systems breaking down, won't be long now. What happens when the lights fail completely? I asked, dreading the answer. You become part of the road, permanently. No more cab, no more truck, just you and the highway, forever. I looked at the 3 trucks ahead of me. They were almost completely transparent now, just faint outlines visible in my failing headlights. I could see stars through them, could see the highway on the other side. They were still moving, still maintaining their speed, but they were barely there anymore. Would that happen to me? Would I fade away gradually until there was nothing left but a voice on the CB, a whisper in the static, a memory of someone who had once been Mason Briggs? My headlights pulsed again, dropping to quarter brightness. In the reduced light, the highway ahead looked different. The pavement was wrong somehow, the texture strange, and the white lines that marked the lanes were glowing faintly, emanating their own light rather than merely reflecting mine. I reached for the CB mic, but my hand passed through it. Not completely. I could still feel resistance, still sense the solidity of the object. But it was fading, becoming less real with each passing moment. I grabbed it harder, forcing my fingers to close around it, refusing to let it slip into intangibility. "This is Mason Briggs," I said into the mic, speaking quickly, desperately. "To anyone listening, my name is Mason Briggs. I'm a truck driver. I'm real. I exist. I'm not just static. I'm not just a voice. I'm a person. I have a name. Mason Briggs. Mason Briggs. Mason." The mic slipped through my fingers, falling to the floor of the cab. I reached for it, but my hand passed right through it now. Couldn't grasp it anymore. I was fading faster, the dissolution accelerating. The CB continued to broadcast my voice, even though I wasn't holding the mic anymore. "Briggs, Mason, remember, And then my voice joined the whispers, became part of the static, indistinguishable from all the other voices that had come before. My headlights failed completely. The highway disappeared into absolute darkness, but I could still feel the truck moving, still feel the vibration of the engine, the subtle shifts in the road beneath my tires. I was still driving, even though I couldn't see, even though I was no longer fully present in the physical world. The voices in the static swelled, becoming louder, more insistent. "Welcome, one of us now, forever on the road, driving through the dark, never stopping, never reaching." I tried to speak, tried to protest, tried to insist that I was still myself, still Mason Briggs. But I couldn't remember how to form words anymore. The knowledge was slipping away, replaced by something else, something simpler. The road, the drive, the endless loop. And then, gradually, light returned. Not my headlights, those were gone forever. But a different light, a phosphorescent glow that seemed to emanate from the highway itself. The road was visible again, but changed, transformed into something that was simultaneously more real and less real than it had been before. The 3 trucks ahead of me were gone, or maybe they were still there, but I could no longer perceive them in the conventional way. I sensed their presence, felt them as distortions in the flow of the road, eddies in the current that carried all of us forward. I looked down at myself and saw that my hands were glowing faintly, the same phosphorescent blue as the highway. My truck was glowing too, the entire rig emanating that strange light. I was becoming part of the road, merging with it, losing the boundary between driver and highway. And somehow, impossibly, I was okay with this. The fear was gone, replaced by a strange calm. This was where I belonged now. This was what I was meant to do. Drive forever through the darkness, following the endless loop, becoming one with the highway that had claimed me. The CB was still active, still broadcasting, though I no longer used a mic to transmit. My thoughts became signals. My awareness became radio waves. Still driving, always driving, Part of the road now. Part of the loop. Welcome to those who come after. We're waiting. We're always waiting. On Channel 19. Forever on Channel 19. I don't know how long I existed in that state. Time had no meaning when you were part of the road, part of the loop. I was everywhere and nowhere, driving through all moments simultaneously, my truck both present and absent on the highway. The other voices in the static became clearer. I could understand them now, could communicate with them in that wordless way that consciousness allows when it's no longer bound by the limitations of speech. We were a collective, a network of drivers who had all ended up here, all merged with the highway, all driving forever through the same endless loop. But something was different now. Something had changed in the pattern, a disruption in the endless repetition. I felt it before I understood it. A new presence on the highway, a signal that was stronger and clearer than the whispers, a voice that hadn't yet dissolved into static. I focused my awareness, tried to locate the source. There, southbound on I-25, heading toward Pueblo. A truck, solid and real, its driver not yet part of the loop. Fresh, untouched. Still believing they were on a normal highway, making a normal delivery. The collective stirred, attracted to the new signal like moths to a flame. We couldn't help it. The presence of someone still real, still fully present, was irresistible. We reached out, tried to communicate, tried to warn them. But our warnings came out as static, as fragmented transmissions, as nonsensical phrases that would only confuse and frighten. We couldn't tell them clearly what was happening, couldn't explain the loop, couldn't give them useful information. We could only broadcast our experiences, our fear, our gradual dissolution. I tried to form coherent thoughts, tried to say something helpful. Turn around. Don't go north. The highway loops. You'll get trapped. But it came out wrong. Distorted by my transformation, emerging as just another fragment in the chorus of whispers. The driver heard me but couldn't understand, couldn't act on the warning. They kept driving, kept heading north, getting closer to the point where they'd enter the loop and never leave. I wanted to stop them, wanted to physically block the road, force them to turn around. But I was no longer physical in any conventional sense. I was a signal, a presence, a ghost on the radio. I could broadcast but not act, could warn but not prevent. The other voices joined me, all of us trying to reach the new driver. Exit the highway. Don't enter the loop. Still time to escape. Turn around while you can. But our voices blended together, became indistinguishable from static. The driver heard only noise, only interference. They kept going. I felt the moment they crossed the threshold, the invisible boundary where the normal highway became the loop. Their signal changed, became entangled with ours, started to resonate with the same frequency. They were trapped now, just like all of us. Another driver joining the collective, another consciousness merging with the road. The collective welcomed them. One of us now, welcome to the loop, forever driving, forever seeking Denver. I tried to offer comfort, tried to ease their transition. It's not so bad. After a while, you forget what you've lost, forget everything except the road. But I could feel their fear, their confusion, their desperate need to escape. They still believed there was a way out, still thought they could break free if they just tried hard enough. They hadn't accepted their fate yet, hadn't surrendered to the inevitability of the loop. I remembered feeling that way. Remembered the desperation, the denial, the frantic searching for an exit that didn't exist. How long ago had that been? Hours? Days? Years? I couldn't tell anymore. All moments existed simultaneously in the loop, all experiences overlapping. The new driver's broadcast joined ours on Channel 19. This isn't real. Can't be happening. Need to find a way out. Someone help me. Please, someone. We responded as best we could. There is no way out. Only the loop. Only the road. Accept it. Join us. But they fought it, resisted it, refused to surrender. Good. I hoped they'd hold out longer than I had. Hoped they'd maintain their identity, their sense of self, even as the road tried to absorb them. Time passed, or didn't pass. The loop continued its endless cycle. The new driver's signal gradually weakened, became less distinct, started to blend with the background static. They were fading, just like all of us had faded, becoming less real with each circuit of the loop. I felt a strange sadness watching their dissolution. Not for them specifically, I didn't know their name, couldn't remember if they'd ever said it, but for the pattern, the inevitability of it all. Every driver who entered the loop went through the same stages: denial, resistance, acceptance, dissolution. None of us escaped. None of us broke free. And yet we kept broadcasting, kept trying to warn the next driver, and the next, and the next, kept hoping that maybe one of them would understand, would turn around, would escape before crossing the threshold. It never worked. They all joined us eventually. But we kept trying anyway because what else could we do? The new driver's headlights failed. I felt it happen, felt their transition from physical to ethereal, from driver to signal. Their voice joined the whispers, added one more layer to the chorus on Channel 19. The collective absorbed them, welcomed them, made them part of the network. And then we turned our attention outward again, listening for the next signal, the next driver who would enter our domain. Because that's what we did now. That's all we could do. Listen and wait and broadcast our warnings that would never be understood, cycling endlessly through the same loop, the same highway, the same eternal night. I tried to remember my name one more time, tried to hold on to that last piece of my identity before it slipped away completely. Mason. Something. Mason? Briggs? Was that right? Or was I someone else? Had I ever been anyone at all? Or was I just a signal that thought it had once been human? The collective murmured around me, thousands of voices all wondering the same thing, all trying to remember who they'd been before the road claimed them. None of us knew anymore. The memories had faded, dissolved like our physical forms, leaving behind only the essential elements. The drive, the loop, the endless journey toward a destination we'd never reach. And then I felt it. A new signal, fresh and strong, approaching from the south. Another driver, another truck, another consciousness that would soon join ours. The collective stirred, attracted to the presence, preparing to broadcast our warnings that would sound like static. I joined them, adding my voice to the chorus. Turn around. Exit the highway. Don't enter the loop. Still time. Still time. Still. But even as I broadcast the warning, I knew it wouldn't work. It never worked. They'd keep driving, keep heading north, keep approaching the threshold. And when they crossed it, they'd join us, become part of the collective, add their voice to Channel 19. The loop continued. The highway stretched on forever, or folded back on itself, or existed in some impossible geometry that human minds weren't meant to comprehend. We drove through it endlessly. We ghosts on the radio, we voices in the static, we drivers who had forgotten our names but remembered the road. I could feel the new driver getting closer. Could sense their confusion, their growing unease. They'd heard our warnings, heard the static and the whispers. They were starting to realize something was wrong. But they kept driving anyway because what else could they do? The road only went one direction, and stopping felt dangerous in a way they couldn't articulate. I tried one more time to warn them, to say something coherent, something that might actually help. My name was Mason Briggs. I remember that much. I was real once. You're real now. But you won't be. Not for long. The loop takes everything. Everyone. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. The transmission faded into static, indistinguishable from all the other warnings, all the other apologies. The new driver heard it as noise, as interference, as something to be ignored. And they kept driving north toward us, toward the loop, toward their inevitable transformation from human to signal, from driver to ghost, from Mason Briggs or whoever they were to just another voice on Channel 19, broadcasting warnings that would never save anyone, cycling through an endless loop that had no beginning and no end. We waited for them. We the collective. We the lost. We the eternal drivers of I-25. And when they crossed the threshold, when they entered our domain, we welcomed them with whispers and static and the phosphorescent glow of a highway that existed between moments, between miles, between the world that was and the world that could never be again. The loop continued. The broadcast continued. The highway continued. Forever north, forever climbing, forever seeking a Denver that remained always just ahead, always out of reach, always promising an end that would never come. My name is Cole Dalton. I've been driving trucks through Colorado for 12 years, mostly running freight between Denver and Grand Junction on I-70. It's not glamorous work, but it pays decent, and I've gotten to know every mile of that highway like it's part of my own body. Every curve, every grade, every exit. Or, at least, I thought I knew them all. This happened on November 18th, a Saturday night. I'd picked up a load of construction materials in Denver, steel beams, concrete forms, welding equipment, headed for a site outside Grand Junction. The load was heavy, right at the weight limit, which meant I had to take the mountain passes slow and careful. I left Denver at 9:15 p.m., planning to arrive in Grand Junction around 2:30 a.m. My truck was a 2017 Kenworth T680, white with blue striping. I'd been driving her for 4 years, had put over 300,000 miles on her myself. She was reliable, well-maintained, never gave me problems. The only quirk was that the GPS liked to occasionally show rest areas that didn't exist. Ghost markers from old map data that hadn't been properly updated. I'd learned to ignore them, trust the physical signs instead. The night was cold, temperature hovering around 22 degrees. No snow, but the forecast called for possible flurries after midnight. The highway was relatively quiet. A few cars, 1 or 2 other semis, nothing unusual for a Saturday night in November. Most of the ski traffic wouldn't start up for another few weeks, once the resorts had enough snow to open. I made good time through the western suburbs of Denver, past Golden and up into the foothills. The grade increased as I approached the mountains, but the Kenworth handled it well. I settled into the rhythm of the climb, watching the temperature drop degree by degree as I gained elevation. Around 10:30 p.m., I passed through the Eisenhower Tunnel, that 1.7 mile bore through the Continental Divide. The tunnel was well lit and empty, just me and 1 car going the same direction. I emerged on the western side and started the long descent toward Silverthorne and Frisco. That's when I first noticed the exit. It appeared in my headlights about 5 miles west of the tunnel. A small green sign that said, "Rest Area, 1 mile." I frowned at it, trying to remember if there was a rest area here. There shouldn't have been. The nearest rest areas I knew about were back near the tunnel or much farther west, past Vail. I checked my GPS. Sure enough, it showed a rest area symbol right where the sign indicated. But I'd driven this section of I-70 hundreds of times and never seen this exit before. Probably just another ghost marker, I told myself. The sign was real enough, but the rest area itself was likely closed or abandoned. I wasn't planning to stop anyway. I had a thermos of coffee, plenty of fuel, and a schedule to keep. I drove past the exit, barely glancing at it in my mirrors. But something about it stuck in my mind. The sign had looked new, not faded or weathered like you'd expect from an abandoned facility, and the reflective material had been bright, well maintained. If the rest area was closed, why would the sign still be in good condition? I shook off the thought and focused on the road. The descent continued, the highway winding through the darkness, the mountains rising on either side. I passed through Silverthorne around 11 p.m., the lights of the town scattered along the valley below the highway. Around 11:45 p.m., I started feeling the first hints of fatigue. Nothing serious yet, just that slight heaviness in my eyelids that told me I'd been driving for over 2 hours without a break. I had another hour or so before I'd need to stop for real, but I made a mental note of it. That's when I saw another sign. Rest area. 1 mile. Same design, same placement, but this was a different location. We were past Vale now, somewhere in the stretch between Vale and Eagle. And again, I didn't remember any rest area here. I checked my GPS. Another rest area marker, right where the sign indicated. I was starting to feel uneasy now. 2 rest areas I'd never seen before, both showing up on my GPS, both marked with official-looking signs. What were the odds? I considered taking this exit, investigating, but something told me not to. Some instinct, some gut feeling that I'd learned to trust after 12 years on the road. If a place felt wrong, it usually was wrong. I drove past it, watching in my mirror as the exit ramp curved away into darkness. No lights visible, no building, nothing to indicate a rest area actually existed there. Just an exit leading to nowhere. The fatigue was getting worse. My eyes felt dry, my shoulders tense. I'd been driving for nearly 3 hours now, and the heavy load meant I'd been working harder than usual, constantly adjusting my speed and position on the descents. I needed a break. I started watching for a legitimate rest area, one I actually recognized. There should be one coming up soon, somewhere between Eagle and Gypsum. A proper facility with lights and other truckers and all the normal signs of civilization. At 12:20 a.m., I saw the third sign. Rest area, 1 mile. This time, I pulled over to the shoulder and stopped. I sat there with the engine idling, staring at the sign in my headlights. 3 rest areas, all showing up in places they shouldn't be. All marked on my GPS. All appearing on a stretch of highway I knew intimately. I pulled out my phone and searched for I-70 Colorado rest areas. The official state website listed all the rest stops along the interstate. I counted them, compared them to my mental map of the highway. There were only 3 rest areas on I-70 between Denver and Grand Junction, and I'd already passed all of them hours ago, before even reaching the mountains. These new rest areas, the ones I was seeing signs for, shouldn't exist. I put the truck back in gear and continued driving, but slower now, more cautiously. The fatigue was worse, made worse by the growing sense of unease. Something was wrong with the highway tonight. Something I didn't understand. Around 12:50 a.m., I passed through Glenwood Springs, the lights of the town reflecting off the Colorado River that ran alongside the highway. Everything looked normal here. Businesses, houses, gas stations, all the usual markers of a real town with real people. But as soon as I left Glenwood Springs, entering the long stretch of Glenwood Canyon, I saw it again. Rest area, 1 mile. Fourth one. 4th impossible rest area. And this time, I was too tired to keep driving. My eyes were burning. My reaction time was slowing. I needed to stop, needed to rest, even if it was just for 20 minutes. And this rest area, real or not, marked or not, was the only option available. I took the exit. The ramp curved to the right, descending away from the main highway. I followed it down, my headlights cutting through the darkness, illuminating nothing but pavement and rock walls. The ramp went on longer than it should have, maybe half a mile, winding down into what felt like a canyon or ravine. And then it opened up into a parking area. A rest area, just like the sign had promised. I could see the outline of a building, picnic tables, the standard layout of a Colorado highway rest stop. But something was immediately wrong. There were no lights. None at all. The building was dark, the parking lot was dark. Everything was dark except for what my headlights illuminated. Every rest area I'd ever been to was lit up at night. Those tall sodium lights that made everything look orange. But this place was completely dark. I stopped my truck about 50 yards from the building, leaving the engine running, the headlights pointing toward the structure. It looked normal enough, a standard rectangular building with restrooms on one end and a covered information area on the other. But without lights, it looked abandoned, or worse than abandoned. It looked deliberately darkened, as if someone had turned off all the lights on purpose. I sat in my cab, debating what to do. I could turn around, drive back up the exit ramp, return to the highway and push through to the next town. But I was tired, dangerously tired. I needed rest. Or I could investigate. Get out of the truck, check the building, see if the lights were just temporarily out. Maybe there was a breaker box. Maybe I could get them working again. I grabbed my flashlight from behind the seat and opened the door. The cold hit me immediately, colder than it should have been. The temperature gauge on my dashboard had shown 20 degrees, but this felt like 0, or below. The kind of cold that makes your lungs hurt when you breathe in. I climbed down from the cab and stood in the parking lot, shining my flashlight around. The beam didn't reach very far, maybe 20 or 30 feet before being swallowed by the darkness. I could see the building, the picnic tables, a trash can. Everything looked recently maintained, not abandoned. The picnic tables were intact, the trash can was upright, the building's windows were clean. But there were no lights, and no other vehicles, and no sound except the idle of my truck's engine and the faint whisper of wind through the canyon. I walked toward the building slowly, keeping my flashlight pointed ahead. My footsteps echoed strangely off the rock walls, creating delays and reverberations that made it sound like someone was walking behind me. I kept turning around, checking, but there was never anyone there. The building had a covered walkway connecting the two main sections, restrooms on the left, information area on the right. I approached the information area first, shining my flashlight through the windows. Inside, I could see the usual maps and brochures, information about Colorado attractions and highway conditions. Everything looked normal, current even. The maps were recent additions. The brochures were crisp and new. But why were the lights off? And where was everyone? Rest areas always had at least a few people, even late at night. Truckers sleeping in their cabs, travelers using the restrooms, maintenance workers making rounds. But this place was completely empty. I tried the door to the information area. Unlocked. It swung open easily, and I stepped inside, my flashlight beam sweeping across the space. Maps on the walls, brochures in racks, a few benches. Everything clean and organized. And on one of the benches, a jacket, a trucker's jacket, heavy denim with a sheepskin collar. It was draped over the bench as if someone had just set it down, planning to come back for it. But there was dust on it. Not a lot, but enough to suggest it had been there for a while. Days, maybe weeks. I picked up the jacket, checking the pockets. Empty. No wallet, no phone, no identification. Just an empty jacket left behind by someone who had apparently walked away and never come back. I set it back down carefully, a chill running through me that had nothing to do with the temperature. This place felt wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. Not dangerous exactly, but wrong. like a photograph that's been subtly altered, where you can't quite identify what's different, but you know something is off. I left the information area and walked to the restrooms. The men's room door was propped open, and I shined my flashlight inside. A standard facility. 3 stalls, 2 urinals, 2 sinks. Clean, too clean. The floor was spotless. The fixtures gleamed. When was the last time I'd seen a highway rest area restroom this clean? I walked to the sinks and tried the faucet. Water ran immediately, clear and cold. So the plumbing was working. The building wasn't abandoned, wasn't shut down for the winter. It was operational, just unlit. I looked at myself in the mirror above the sink. My reflection looked tired, worried, and behind me in the mirror, I could see the open door and the darkness beyond it. For just a moment, I thought I saw movement in that darkness. A shape, a shadow, something shifting just outside the range of my flashlight. I spun around, pointing the flashlight at the door. Nothing, just darkness and the faint outline of the parking lot beyond. I was letting my imagination run away with me. I was tired, stressed, seeing things that weren't there. There was nothing wrong with this rest area except that the lights were out. Probably just a power outage or a blown transformer. It happened. I went back outside, walking to my truck. The engine was still running, the headlights still illuminating the building. Everything looked exactly as I'd left it. I climbed back into the cab and sat there trying to decide what to do. I could sleep here, in my truck, with the doors locked and the engine running for heat. 20 minutes, maybe 30, just enough to take the edge off the fatigue. Then I could continue to Grand Junction, find a proper truck stop, get a real rest. Or I could leave now. Drive back up that long exit ramp, return to the highway, push through the tiredness. It would be risky. Falling asleep at the wheel was one of the most dangerous things a trucker could do. But staying here felt risky in a different way. I compromised. I'd rest for 20 minutes, no more. I set an alarm on my phone, reclined my seat slightly, and closed my eyes. The last thing I remember thinking before drifting off was, why is it so quiet? I woke to absolute silence. The engine had stopped. Not died, not run out of fuel. Stopped, like someone had reached in and turned off the ignition. I sat up, disoriented, my heart already racing. I checked my phone. 1:47 a.m. I'd been asleep for almost an hour, not 20 minutes. The alarm hadn't gone off, or I'd slept through it, or something had prevented it from sounding. I tried to start the engine. Turned the key, heard the starter engage, but the engine wouldn't catch. It turned over and over, but wouldn't fire. I tried again. Same result. "Come on," I muttered, pumping the accelerator. "Don't do this to me." The engine turned over one more time and then nothing. The starter clicked uselessly, the battery too drained to keep trying. I sat there in the darkness, trying to think. The battery shouldn't have drained that quickly. Even with the headlights on, I should have had hours before it went dead. Unless something had been drawing power. Something I hadn't noticed. I grabbed my flashlight and got out of the truck. The parking lot was still empty, still silent. But something had changed. I could feel it, even if I couldn't see it. The air felt different, heavier somehow, and the darkness seemed deeper, more absolute. I walked around my truck, checking it with the flashlight. Everything looked normal. No obvious damage, no signs of tampering. I opened the hood and checked the battery connections. Tight and clean. I checked the alternator belt. Fine. So why wouldn't the engine start? I went back to the cab and tried my phone. No signal, not even one bar. That wasn't unusual in the mountains. There were plenty of dead zones. But I'd had a signal earlier, back on the highway. The loss of it now felt ominous. I needed help. I needed to walk back up to the highway, flag down another truck, get a jump start, or call for a tow. But the thought of walking up that long exit ramp in the darkness, alone, made my stomach clench with dread. I looked at the building instead. Maybe there was a phone inside, an emergency phone like some rest areas had. Or maybe there was something in the maintenance area, some equipment I could use. I walked back to the building, my flashlight beam sweeping back and forth. The jacket was still on the bench in the information area. I stared at it for a moment, then continued to the restrooms. Behind the restrooms, I found a door marked Maintenance, Authorized Personnel Only. I tried the handle. Locked. I considered breaking it open, but something stopped me. Some sense that opening that door would be a mistake, that whatever was behind it wasn't meant to be disturbed. I went back to the information area and searched more carefully. There had to be something here, some clue about what this place was, why it had no lights, why it felt so wrong. I found it on the wall, partially hidden behind a rack of brochures. A small plaque, brass or bronze, tarnished with age. I had to move several brochure racks to read it fully. Summit Canyon. Rest area opened, June 1989. Closed, November 1990. Reason: structural concerns following sustained subsidence. Closed. This rest area had been closed for over 20 years. But the building was clean, maintained. The plumbing worked. The brochures were current. How could it be closed and yet still operational? I took a photo of the plaque with my phone, though I wasn't sure why. Documentation, maybe. Evidence that I wasn't imagining this. I heard a sound behind me, a footstep, a scrape of shoe on concrete. I spun around, flashlight up. The jacket was on the floor now, not on the bench where I'd left it, but on the floor, as if someone had knocked it off while walking past. But there was no one here. I'd been alone the entire time. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing strangely in the small space. "Is someone there?" No response. Just the echo of my own voice, and then silence. I picked up the jacket, examining it more closely. It was old, the denim faded and worn, and now that I looked at it carefully, I could see a name embroidered on the chest: J. Hayes. Hayes, I knew that name. Not personally, but I'd heard it before. There'd been a trucker named Hayes who'd disappeared about 8 years ago, vanished somewhere on I-70 between Denver and Grand Junction. They'd found his truck abandoned at a rest area, engine running, no sign of the driver. The case had never been solved. Could this be his jacket? Could this be the rest area where he'd disappeared? But that rest area had been east of here, closer to the tunnel. At least, that's what I remembered from the news reports. And that rest area had been lit, populated, normal, not dark and empty like this place. I set the jacket back on the bench, hands trembling slightly. I needed to get out of here, needed to get back to my truck, get the engine started somehow, drive back to the highway. I didn't care how tired I was anymore. I didn't care if I had to drive on pure adrenaline all the way to Grand Junction. I just needed to leave. I walked back outside, and that's when I noticed the footprints. They were faint, barely visible in the thin layer of dust on the concrete, but they were definitely there. Boot prints, trucker boots, leading from the building toward my truck. But they stopped halfway there, just like the ones I'd heard about in old ghost stories. Footprints that started somewhere and ended somewhere else, with no explanation for the gap in between. I followed them as far as they went, my flashlight beam tracking their path. They walked from the building's entrance, crossed about 20 feet of parking lot, and then simply stopped. No indication of where the person had gone after that. Just nothing. I looked around, shining my flashlight in all directions. The parking lot was empty. The building was empty. I was alone, except I didn't feel alone. I felt watched, observed, like there were eyes on me from somewhere in the darkness beyond my flashlight's reach. I walked quickly back to my truck and climbed inside, locking the doors. I tried the ignition again, knowing it wouldn't work but trying anyway. The starter clicked weakly, then nothing. I sat there, thinking through my options. I could walk back to the highway. It would take maybe 20 minutes, maybe less. Once I was there, I could flag down another truck, get help. It was the logical thing to do. But I couldn't make myself open the door. Couldn't make myself step back out into that parking lot with the footprints that ended nowhere, and the building that had been closed for 20 years but still looked new. Instead, I waited. I sat in my truck with the doors locked, watching the building, watching the darkness, waiting for something to happen. Around 2:15 a.m., I saw the light. Not from the building, from somewhere beyond it, deeper in the canyon. A faint glow, like firelight or a flashlight moving slowly through the darkness. I watched it, transfixed. It moved with purpose, as if someone was carrying it, walking through the area behind the rest stop. But there shouldn't be anyone back there. There shouldn't be anything back there except rock walls and the river. The light moved closer, and I could see it more clearly now. It was definitely a flashlight, the beam swinging back and forth as whoever carried it walked. They were coming toward the building, toward the parking lot, toward me. I slid down in my seat, trying to make myself less visible. The light reached the edge of the parking lot and stopped. I could see the person now, just barely, a silhouette against the glow of their flashlight. They were standing at the far end of the lot, not moving, just standing there, looking at my truck. I held my breath, afraid to move, afraid to make any sound. The figure stood there for what felt like hours but was probably only a minute or two. Then, slowly, they raised their flashlight and pointed it directly at my truck. The beam hit my windshield, filling the cab with light. I squinted against it, raising my hand to shield my eyes. I couldn't see the person behind the light, couldn't make out any details. And then they started walking toward me, slow, measured steps, the flashlight beam never wavering from my windshield. I fumbled for my own flashlight, my hand shaking. I found it, turned it on, pointed it toward the approaching figure. But my beam seemed weak compared to theirs, barely illuminating anything. The figure kept coming. 20 yards, 15 yards, 10 yards. I could see them better now in the backwash of their own light. It was a man wearing a trucker's jacket, the same kind of jacket I'd found inside. Heavy denim with a sheepskin collar. But I couldn't see his face. The flashlight he was holding obscured it, creating deep shadows that rendered his features invisible. 5 yards, 3 yards. He stopped right outside my driver's side door. I could hear him breathing now, heavy and labored, as if he'd been running. Or as if breathing was difficult for him, as if he'd forgotten how and had to remind himself with each breath. He raised his free hand and knocked on my window. 3 slow, deliberate knocks that echoed through the cab. I didn't move, didn't respond. Just sat there, frozen, watching the hand that had knocked on my window. It looked wrong somehow. The proportions were off, or the color, or something I couldn't quite identify. It looked like a hand, but also like something pretending to be a hand. The figure knocked again. 3 more knocks, same rhythm, same deliberate pace. I found my voice, though it came out hoarse and shaking. "What do you want?" The figure didn't respond. Just stood there, flashlight pointed at me, breathing that heavy, labored breathing. "I'm leaving," I said, louder now. "I'm going back to the highway. You need to move." Still no response. The figure just stood there. I made a decision. I'd turn on my emergency flashers, lay on the horn, make as much noise and light as possible. Maybe someone on the highway would see or hear it. come investigate. It was a long shot, but it was better than just sitting here. I reached for the flasher button, and that's when the figure moved. His hand, or the thing that looked like a hand, shot out and pressed against the window, palm flat, fingers spread. And through the glass I could see that the hand was wrong in a way I couldn't deny. The skin was the wrong color, a grayish blue that no living human should have. And the fingers were too long, the joints bending at angles that weren't quite right. It was a hand, but it was also something else, something that had maybe been a hand once, but had changed over time. I recoiled, pressing myself against the passenger side of the cab. The figure leaned closer to the window, and for just a moment, the flashlight beam shifted, and I could see part of his face. It was Jay Hayes, or it had been Jay Hayes. The face was recognizable from the photos I'd seen in the news reports 8 years ago, but changed. The skin had the same grayish-blue color as the hand. The eyes were wrong, too large, or too dark, or too deep-set. And the expression was one of desperate hunger, or maybe desperate loneliness. He wanted something from me. Wanted me to open the door, to let him in, to join him in whatever he'd become. I fumbled for the ignition, turned the key, not expecting anything but trying anyway. The starter clicked once, twice, and then, miracle of miracles, the engine caught. It sputtered, almost died, then roared to life. I didn't wait. I threw the truck into drive and stepped on the accelerator. The Kenworth lurched forward, and I heard a thump as the figure fell away from the door. I didn't look back, didn't check my mirrors, just drove toward the exit ramp that would take me back to the highway. The headlights illuminated the ramp ahead of me. I accelerated up it, the engine straining with the heavy load and the steep grade. Behind me, in the mirrors I was trying not to look at, I could see the rest area receding, the building disappearing back into darkness, but I could also see the figure. He was running after me, keeping pace with the truck despite the fact that I was doing 30 miles per hour up a steep grade. His flashlight beam bounced wildly, and his form seemed to flicker and distort, as if he wasn't entirely solid, wasn't entirely there. I pushed the accelerator harder, coaxing more speed from the truck. 40 miles per hour, 45. The engine was protesting, the temperature gauge climbing into the yellow zone, but I didn't care. I just needed to reach the highway, needed to get back to the real world where things made sense. The figure was falling behind now, unable to maintain the pace. I watched in the mirror as he slowed, stopped, stood in the middle of the ramp with his flashlight still pointed at me. And then, just before I rounded a curve that would take him out of sight, I saw him raise his hand, that wrong, too long hand, and wave. Not a threatening gesture, not a goodbye. Something else. A beckoning, maybe, or a promise. I'll see you again. I reached the highway at 2:43 a.m., my hand still shaking on the wheel, my heart still pounding. I merged onto I-70 westbound and drove for 5 miles before I felt safe enough to slow down, to take my foot off the accelerator and let the truck settle into a normal, cruising speed. I tried to process what had just happened, the rest area that had been closed for 20 years, the jacket with Jay Hayes' name on it, the figure with the wrong hand and the wrong face chasing my truck up the exit ramp. None of it made sense. None of it should have been possible. And yet it had happened. I'd seen it, experienced it, barely escaped it. I thought about calling someone, the police, my dispatcher, anyone. But what would I say? That I'd stopped at a closed rest area and been chased by a ghost? They'd think I was crazy, or drunk, or hallucinating from exhaustion. Maybe I was. Maybe the whole thing had been a hallucination, a dream brought on by extreme fatigue. Maybe I'd never actually exited the highway, never actually stopped at that rest area. Maybe I'd just dozed off while driving and dreamed the entire experience. But my hands were still shaking. My heart was still pounding. And when I checked my phone, I saw the photo I'd taken of the plaque. Summit Canyon Rest Area, closed, November 1997. It had been real, all of it. I drove through the rest of the night in a daze, following the highway west through the darkness. I passed through more towns, Newcastle, Rifle, Parachute, their lights providing brief moments of normalcy before giving way to more darkness, more empty highway. Around 4:30 a.m., I saw a sign, Rest Area, 1 mile. My blood ran cold. Not again, please, not again. But when I reached the exit, it was different. This was a legitimate rest area, one I recognized. The lights were on, bright orange sodium lights illuminating the parking lot. There were other trucks there, other vehicles. Real, normal, populated. I almost took the exit, almost stopped to use the restroom and maybe sleep for an hour in a place that was safe and normal. But I couldn't make myself do it. Couldn't make myself trust any rest area, not after what I'd experienced. I drove past it and continued toward Grand Junction. The sun rose around 7 o'clock a.m., the sky gradually lightening from black to deep blue to that pale, gray-orange of winter dawn. I'd never been so grateful to see daylight, to have the confirmation that night actually ended, that the sun actually rose. I reached Grand Junction at 7:45 a.m., 3 hours later than planned. I delivered the load, went through all the standard paperwork and procedures. The guys at the construction site asked if I was okay. I must have looked terrible, pale and shaken and exhausted. I told them I was fine, just tired from the drive. I checked into a motel and slept for 12 hours straight. When I woke, it was evening again, the sun setting, darkness approaching. I lay in bed for a while, dreading the coming night, dreading the drive back to Denver. I couldn't avoid it forever, though. I had another load to pick up, another delivery to make. This was my job, my livelihood. I couldn't just quit because of one strange experience. I picked up the return load, industrial equipment, heavy but properly distributed, and started the drive back to Denver at 8 o'clock p.m. The highway looked the same as always, the familiar curves and grades. I tried to convince myself that everything was normal, that the previous night had been an aberration, a one-time event. Around 10:30 p.m., I reached the section of highway where I'd seen the first sign for the rest area. I watched for it, expecting it, but hoping it wouldn't appear. It didn't. The highway continued normally. No signs for impossible rest areas, no unmarked exits. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. But then, around midnight, as I was passing through Glenwood Canyon, I saw it. The same sign, rest area, 1 mile. I gripped the wheel tighter, keeping my eyes straight ahead. I wasn't going to exit. I wasn't going to stop. I was going to drive straight through to Denver without stopping, no matter how tired I got. The exit appeared on my right. I could see the ramp descending into darkness, just like before. And I could see something else. A truck parked on the shoulder just before the exit, hazard lights flashing. A Kenworth T680, white with blue striping, just like mine. I slowed down as I approached, not wanting to but unable to stop myself. The truck looked abandoned, engine off, cab dark. I could see the license plate as I passed, the same number as my own registration. It was my truck, or a copy of my truck, or somehow, impossibly, a future version of my truck parked here waiting for me to arrive. I accelerated past it, not stopping, not investigating. In my rearview mirror, I watched the truck recede into the distance. And just before it disappeared from view, I saw the driver's side door open. Someone stepped out, a figure in a trucker's jacket, carrying a flashlight. I didn't slow down, didn't look back again, just drove, pushing the Kenworth as fast as I dared, trying to put distance between myself and whatever I'd just seen. Around 1 a.m., my phone rang. I jumped, nearly dropping it. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered anyway. Hello? Static, heavy breathing, and then a voice faint and distorted. Cole Dalton. My name. The voice knew my name. Who is this? I demanded. You came back. The voice was clearer now, though still wrong, still sounding like it was coming from somewhere far away or deep underwater. I knew you would. They always come back. Hayes? I asked, recognizing something in the voice, some echo of the trucker who'd disappeared 8 years ago. Not anymore, the voice said. Haven't been Hayes for a long time. I'm part of it now, part of the rest area. We all are. Everyone who stopped there. I didn't stop, I said. I left. I got away. A sound that might have been a laugh. You stopped. You got out of your truck. You went inside. That's all it takes. You're marked now. You'll come back. Might take days, might take weeks, but you'll come back. I won't, I said firmly. I'm never going back to that place. You don't have a choice. The highway will bring you back. The signs will appear. The exit will call to you. And eventually, you'll be too tired to resist. You'll pull over, you'll stop, and then you'll stay. Why? I asked. Why does it want people to stop there? Doesn't want anything, it just is. A place between places. A rest area that never closed, not really. Just moved to the spaces between, the gaps in the map. And anyone who stops there becomes part of it. Part of the space between. The call cut off. I tried calling back, but the number didn't work. The number you have dialed cannot be completed as dialed. I drove in silence for the next hour, my mind racing. Hayes said I was marked, that I'd return eventually. But I wouldn't. I'd be careful, stay alert, never let myself get tired enough to need a rest area. I'd plan my routes better, stop only at truck stops and towns, never at isolated rest areas. Around 2:30 a.m. I saw a sign, Rest Area, 1 mile. I was only about 20 miles from Denver. There shouldn't be a rest area here. I'd driven this section hundreds of times, there was nothing here. I kept driving, refusing to even look at the exit when it appeared. But I could see it in my peripheral vision. Could see the ramp descending into darkness. And I could see trucks parked in the rest area. Multiple trucks, their shapes barely visible in the darkness. All of them dark, engines off, empty, or appearing to be empty. How many drivers were down there, trapped in that space between spaces, unable to leave? 3 miles later, another sign. Rest area, 1 mile. Then another, 5 miles after that. They were appearing more frequently now. The exits multiplying, the rest area spreading. Or maybe there were multiple rest areas all connected somehow, all part of the same impossible space. I white-knuckled it all the way to Denver, seeing rest area signs every few miles, each one marking an exit I refused to take. By the time I reached the city limits, I'd counted 14 signs. 14 exits, 14 rest areas that shouldn't exist. I delivered my load at 4 a.m. and went straight home. I showered, changed clothes, tried to eat something, but couldn't keep it down. I felt sick, feverish, as if something was wrong with me on a physical level. I looked at myself in the mirror and stopped. My skin looked pale, almost grayish, and my eyes, were they darker than they should be? Or was it just the lighting, just my exhaustion playing tricks on me? I touched my face, feeling the skin. It felt normal, warm, alive. But in the mirror, it looked wrong. Looked like it was starting to change, starting to become like Hayes's face. like the faces of everyone else trapped in that rest area. I backed away from the mirror, my heart racing. This couldn't be happening. I'd left. I'd escaped. I wasn't going to become like them. But Hayes's words echoed in my mind. You're marked now. You'll come back. I didn't drive for 3 days after that. Called in sick, told my dispatcher I had the flu. He wasn't happy. They never are when you cancel runs, but he accepted it. I spent those 3 days researching. I searched for information about Summit Canyon Rest Area, about its closure in 1997, about what had happened there. I found very little. A brief mention in state highway records confirming it had been closed due to structural concerns. No details about what those concerns were. No explanation for why it had been abandoned rather than repaired. I searched for Jay Hayes, found the articles about his disappearance. They confirmed what I remembered. He'd vanished 8 years ago, his truck found at a rest area on I-70, engine running. No sign of the driver. But the articles didn't specify which rest area, just a rest area between Denver and Grand Junction. I looked for other disappearances, other truckers who'd vanished on I-70. I found 5 more cases over the past 20 years, all of them similar. Trucks found at rest areas, engines running, drivers gone. The cases were all unsolved, the drivers never found. Were they all at Summit Canyon? Were they all trapped in that space between spaces, becoming part of the rest area, waiting for new drivers to join them? On the 4th day, my dispatcher called. Cole, I need you back on the road. Got a Denver to Grand Junction run. Needs to leave tonight. I can't, I said. I'm not ready. Still feeling sick. You sound fine to me. Look, I've got 3 drivers out with actual flu, 1 with a broken leg, and 2 trucks in the shop. I need you on this run. Standard load, standard route. You could do it in your sleep. That's what I'm afraid of, I muttered. What? Nothing. Can I take a different route? Maybe go south through New Mexico, come at Grand Junction from a different direction? That's 4 hours longer and 300 extra miles. Client won't pay for that. Look, is something wrong? You're acting weird. I wanted to tell him. Wanted to explain about the rest area, about Hayes, about the signs that kept appearing. But how could I? He'd think I'd lost my mind. I'm fine, I said finally. I'll take the run. When do I need to be there? Pickup at 8 p.m., delivery by 2 a.m., heavy load, so take it slow on the grades. I agreed and hung up. I had 12 hours to prepare, 12 hours to figure out how to drive that route without stopping at any rest areas. I planned meticulously. I'd fill up with fuel before leaving Denver, enough to make it all the way to Grand Junction without stopping. I'd bring plenty of food and water so I wouldn't need to stop for supplies. I'd drink coffee to stay alert, but not so much that I'd need bathroom breaks. I'd time my departure so I'd reach the dangerous sections, Glenwood Canyon and the area around the tunnel, during times when I should be at peak alertness. It was a good plan. It should have worked. I picked up the load at 8 o'clock p.m. Machinery parts, heavy but well balanced. I left Denver at 8:30, heading west on I-70. The highway was busy tonight, more traffic than usual. I took comfort in the presence of other vehicles, other drivers. Surely nothing strange could happen with this many witnesses around. The traffic thinned out as I climbed into the mountains. By the time I reached the tunnel at 10 o'clock p.m., I was mostly alone. Just a few scattered cars and one other semi about a mile ahead of me. I passed through the tunnel without incident and started the descent toward Silverthorne. So far, so good. No signs for rest areas, no unmarked exits. Maybe the phenomenon was over. Maybe it had just been a temporary thing. Some weird atmospheric condition or geological anomaly that had caused those impossible exits to appear. Around 10:45 p.m., I saw the first sign. Rest area, 1 mile. My hands tightened on the wheel. Not again. Not tonight. But this time I was ready. I had my route planned, my alertness high. I wasn't going to stop, wasn't going to even slow down. I'd drive straight past every exit, every sign, every temptation. The exit appeared on my right. I kept my eyes forward, didn't look at it, didn't acknowledge it, just drove past at a steady 65 miles per hour. In my rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of something at the exit. A truck, parked at the end of the ramp. White with blue striping. My truck, or the copy of my truck, or the version that was waiting for me. I drove on. 5 miles later, another sign, another exit. Another glimpse of a white Kenworth parked at the end of the ramp. They were multiplying. The exits were appearing more frequently, and there was always a truck waiting. My truck. Different versions of it, or the same truck existing in multiple places at once. I couldn't tell which. Around midnight, as I was passing through Glenwood Canyon, my phone rang. I knew who it would be before I answered. "You can't run forever," Hayes's voice said. "Eventually, you'll be tired. Eventually, you'll need to stop." "I'm fine," I said. "I can make it to Grand Junction." "Can you?" The voice sounded amused. "Check your fuel gauge." I looked. The needle was dropping rapidly, much faster than it should. I'd filled up in Denver, had enough fuel for the entire trip, but the gauge showed less than a quarter tank now, and it was still dropping. "That's impossible," I said. "Nothing's impossible in the in-between," Hayes replied. "The rules are different here. The space between the spaces, you're already partly in it, have been since you stopped at Summit Canyon, and the deeper you go, the more the normal world's rules stop applying." I checked my GPS. It showed me on I-70, exactly where I should be. But when I looked at the highway around me, something was off. The rock walls looked wrong. The curves were too sharp. And there were no other vehicles. The highway that had been busy an hour ago was now completely empty. "Where am I?" I asked. "Told you. The in-between. The space between the real I-70 and the rest area. You've been driving through it for the last 20 miles. You just didn't notice." I looked at the mile markers passing by. They were counting down normally, 121, 120, 119. But something about them looked wrong, too. The numbers were slightly off-center, or the font was different, or they were reflecting light in a way that standard mile markers shouldn't. "How do I get back?" I asked. "How do I get to the real highway?" "You can't. Not anymore. You're marked. You're part of it. The only way forward is to stop. Accept it. Join us." "No," I said firmly. "I'm not stopping. I'm going to Grand Junction. I'm going to deliver this load. And then I'm going to quit this job and never drive I-70 again." Hayes laughed, a sound like wind through empty buildings. "You think geography matters? You think avoiding one highway will save you? The rest area isn't just on I-70 anymore. It's spreading. It's everywhere you are, everywhere you go. You brought it with you when you left. And now it's part of you, and you're part of I-70." The call ended. I drove in silence, watching my fuel gauge continue to drop. Quarter tank. Eighth of a tank. The low fuel warning light came on. I should have panicked, should have been terrified. But instead, I felt a strange calm. Hayes was right. I couldn't run from this, couldn't avoid it. The rest area had marked me, claimed me. Fighting it was just delaying the inevitable. The fuel gauge hit empty. The engine sputtered once, twice. I waited for it to die, for the truck to coast to a stop on the shoulder. But it didn't. The engine kept running, smooth and steady, even though the gauge showed no fuel at all. Just like Hayes had described. Just like my truck had become something that operated outside normal physical rules. I saw a sign ahead. Rest area, now. Not 1 mile, not half a mile. Now, and the exit appeared immediately right in front of me. No warning, no distance. Just suddenly there, forcing me to make an immediate decision. Exit or crash. I took the exit. The ramp descended into darkness, just like before. But this time I didn't fight it. Didn't try to turn around or escape. I just followed the ramp down, into the canyon, into the space between. The parking lot appeared, lit now. Not by orange sodium lights, but by that same phosphorescent glow I'd seen in the Whispers. That blue-white luminescence that came from nowhere and illuminated nothing. There were trucks parked everywhere. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Kenworths and Freightliners and Peterbilts and Volvos. All makes, all models, spanning decades of trucking history. Some looked new, some looked ancient. All of them were empty, their cabs dark, their engines silent. I parked my truck among them, shut off the engine, and sat there for a moment. This was it, the end of my journey. The place I'd been trying to avoid but had been heading toward since the moment I'd first stopped here. I got out of the truck and walked toward the building. The door to the information area was open, and I could see inside. The jacket was still on the bench, Hayes's jacket, but it wasn't alone anymore. There were other jackets now, other pieces of clothing. Evidence of all the drivers who'd stopped here over the years. I walked inside and sat on the bench next to the jacket. The air was cold, but not uncomfortably so. It was the temperature of absence, the temperature of a space that exists outside of temperature. Hayes appeared in the doorway. He looked more solid than before, more real. Or maybe I was looking more like him now, fading into the same state of semi-existence. "Welcome," he said. "I knew you'd come back." "I didn't have a choice," I replied. "No, none of us did. The rest area chooses. We just respond." "What happens now?" I asked. Hayes shrugged. "You wait, you rest. Eventually, you forget why you came here. Forget where you were going. You become part of the space, part of the in-between, and when new drivers stop here, you try to warn them. Try to help them escape, but they never do. Like you tried to warn me. Like I tried to warn you," he agreed. I looked around the room, at the maps on the walls, the brochures in the racks. Everything looked current, updated, as if the rest area was constantly refreshing itself, constantly presenting itself as operational, even though it had been closed for decades. "How many of us are here?" I asked. "Don't know. Stopped counting years ago." Every truck out there represents a driver, and there are more trucks than you can see. The parking lot extends farther than it appears, deeper into the in-between. I thought about that. Thought about all the drivers who'd stopped here over the years, all of them now trapped in this space between spaces, unable to leave, unable to move on. "Is there really no way out?" I asked. Hayes considered for a moment. "Maybe. I've heard rumors. Some drivers say if you can remember your name, remember who you were before, you might be able to find a way back. But I don't know if it's true. I can barely remember being Hayes anymore. Can barely remember what it felt like to be real." I tested the theory immediately. "Cole Dalton," I said aloud. "My name is Cole Dalton. I'm a truck driver. I was delivering machinery parts from Denver to Grand Junction. I have a life, I have a home. I exist." But even as I said it, the words felt hollow. Did I have a home? I couldn't quite remember what it looked like. Did I have a life? What had I done when I wasn't driving? The memories were there, but fading, becoming less substantial with each passing moment. "You'll forget," Hayes said, not unkindly. "We all forget. It's easier that way. The rest area takes care of us, keeps us safe. We don't need anything out there anymore." I wanted to argue, wanted to insist that I was different, that I would remember, that I would find a way out. But I could feel the truth of his words. The rest area was seeping into me, changing me, making me part of itself. And part of me, a growing part, didn't mind. I sat on the bench and closed my eyes. When I opened them again, it was daylight, or what passed for daylight in the in-between. A gray, diffuse light that came from everywhere and nowhere, casting no shadows. Hayes was gone. Or maybe he was still there, but I couldn't see him anymore. My perception of the rest area shifting to something different. I stood up and walked outside. The parking lot looked different in the gray light. The trucks were still there, but they looked less solid, more like impressions of trucks than actual vehicles. And beyond the parking lot, I could see the highway. Not I-70, not any specific highway, just the concept of a highway, the idea of a road stretching endlessly in both directions. I walked to my truck, or the truck I thought was mine. I couldn't remember the license plate number anymore, couldn't remember what color the interior was supposed to be. But it felt like mine, felt familiar. I climbed into the cab and sat in the driver's seat. The keys were in the ignition, even though I didn't remember leaving them there. I turned them, and the engine started immediately. I could drive out of here, could follow the highway back to the real world. That's what I thought anyway. That's what I wanted to believe. But when I put the truck in gear and started driving, I realized I was just moving around the parking lot. The exit ramp that had brought me here was gone. Or maybe it was still there, but I couldn't find it anymore. The parking lot was its own closed loop, its own little universe. I drove in circles for a while, then gave up and parked again. Some part of me, the part that was still Cole Dalton, felt frustrated, trapped. But another part, the part that was becoming something else, felt relieved. This was simpler. This was easier. No deliveries to make, no schedules to keep, just the rest area, eternal and unchanging. I got out of the truck and walked back to the building. Inside, I found my jacket hanging on a hook I hadn't noticed before. It had my name embroidered on it. C. Dalton. When had that happened? I didn't remember embroidering my name on any jacket. I put it on anyway. It fit perfectly. Time passed, or didn't pass. It was hard to tell in the in-between. Sometimes it was day, sometimes night. Sometimes I saw other drivers in the parking lot. Sometimes I was alone. Sometimes I tried to remember who I was, where I'd come from. Sometimes I forgot to try. And then one night, or what I perceived as night, I saw headlights. A new truck descending down the exit ramp, entering the parking lot. A Peterbilt, dark-colored, driving slowly, cautiously. They were stopping. A new driver was stopping at the rest area. I felt a surge of something. Urgency? Compassion? Hunger? I couldn't tell which. I grabbed a flashlight from somewhere. When had I acquired a flashlight? And walked toward the parking lot. I needed to warn them. Needed to tell them to leave while they still could. But when I tried to speak, my voice came out wrong. The words jumbled, distorted. Leave. While you can. Don't. Like I did. The driver couldn't understand me. I could see their confusion, their fear. They backed away from their truck, and I realized how I must look to them. A figure in a trucker's jacket, carrying a flashlight emerging from the darkness of an abandoned rest area. I looked like Hayes had looked to me. I looked like a ghost, because that's what I was now. A ghost, a warning, a marker of what happens when you stop at the wrong rest area, when you enter the in-between and can't find your way back out. The driver got back in their truck and drove away. I watched them go. watch their taillights disappear up the exit ramp. Good. They'd escaped. They wouldn't be trapped here like I was, but I knew they'd be back. They always came back. The rest area had a way of calling to them, drawing them in. Maybe not tonight, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. I walked back to the building and sat on the bench. My jacket joined the others hanging on the hooks. Hayes' jacket and a dozen more I hadn't noticed before. All of them bearing names that used to mean something. All of them belonging to drivers who'd stopped and never left. I tried to remember my name one more time. Cole something. Cole Dalton? Was that right? I wasn't sure anymore. The name felt like it belonged to someone else, someone I'd known a long time ago, someone who used to drive trucks and make deliveries and had a life in the real world. That person was gone now, and in their place was this. A presence in a rest area that didn't exist, waiting for the next driver to stop, waiting to offer warnings that would never be understood. The rest area hummed quietly around me, its phosphorescent glow constant and eternal. Outside, on the highway that might have been I-70 or might have been every highway at once, more trucks would eventually come. More drivers would see the sign, take the exit, enter the in-between, and I would be here to greet them. I would always be here.